inside the board. And free from the hive mind, this is Rex Bear, hosting Leak Project. The Leak Project was created to offer awareness and information not found in the mainstream news. With over 90% of the world's media controlled by only 6 enormous conglomerates, many people today are looking for more accurate information. The Leak Project offers a refreshing approach to the brain drain media. Check back daily for new content as we thrive to bring you the cutting edge in news, current events, on-scene video footage, interviews, and most importantly, the truth. So tonight's guest, ladies and gentlemen, we have Suzanne Posel. It's great to have you on the show again tonight, Suzanne. Thank you for making it out.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. I know that last time we talked, there was that glitch in Wall Street that caused that flash crash, and you were able to come out with some information about those algorithms that those giant corporations use to take advantage of the stock market. Recently, the past, I would say, month or so, there sure has been a whole lot of activity going on around the world. In China, they devalued the yen 3 days in a row, and on the third day, there's this giant explosion at this, they call it chemical plant. But when I looked at the photographs, I saw dozens of 42-foot containers that look like they got thrown around like a box of cereal. This enormous amount of square footage got blown to shreds, just got annihilated. You see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars that are just trashed. And in my opinion, that isn't a chemical explosion. That's got to be either some type of maybe tactical nuclear weapon, or I know that there is a lot of information out there about the Rod of God, this kinesthetic weapon from space, where this like satellite type system that throws these giant propulsion systems down into the earth at just mass speeds. But what's the information that you've put together about that explosion that happened in China, the first one that happened on August 11th in, I think the name of it is Tianjin?
Your guess is better than mine. I'm terrible at pronouncing foreign names correctly. To be honest with you, China has been working their people up into a frenzy for quite some time, and I'm sure that you've seen these articles about the internet being. They have the Great China Wall up in the internet, and they're blocking websites, and they're not allowing people to talk. And they have this Chinese version of Facebook. It's not Facebook, but it's like a Facebook. And they completely shut that down and won't let people talk on it. And the press are not allowed to talk about certain things, otherwise they go to prison. There's a huge tension going on in China, especially and if you look at it the other way with the multinational corporations, they're paying the governments and the provinces and then the workers very, very little, and they're getting a lot out of it. And you can only work people in that indentured servitude for so long. And millennials are the same across the world, whether you're in India or in Pakistan or in China or in Russia. Millennials are exactly the same, and they all have access to the internet, and they all know how to use it. And really what I think that's happening in China is the oppressive government has probably pushed too many people too far, and they're really getting sick of it. And they are acting out in defense of what they feel like is the only way to do things, because the government and the society is so, like I said, so oppressive, that the only way to do something is to do something big and do something grandiose. As far as some of the evidence that has come out, I don't see enough research into what it could have been, and the hypothesis that come out of that. I don't see any expert evidence that what they're asserting is even possible. So I think I'm going to fall back to my interpretation of what's going on in China. They are, it's like a dark ages. They're trying, and it's in the middle of a technological revolution. Everybody's got access to it. Imagine you're the only kid on the block who, in 1985 didn't have a Nintendo 64. You probably would have felt really bad about yourself. Well, that's kind of like how it is in China. They know that they can proverbially go over to somebody else's house and play the Nintendo 64, but they don't have access to it themselves, as we and everybody else pretty much does. And yet they are the makers of all of this technology, which is ironic, because you go and you buy your new iPhone, for $600-700 or $1,000, and it cost the company $1.50 to make at one of these sweatshops. So these are the people who are making the products that we're buying, and we're able to use technology that they're not able to use, and yet they're making the products. I think there's just some plain human envy and wanting to be free and not wanting to be oppressed. that I think the millennial generation in China, which, like I said, is the same over throughout in any nation, it's a generation that really does not want to be oppressed, that wants to express itself as it sees fit, and doesn't want to live under the oppressions of the generation before in such a great extent because they have access to the internet. They grew up with social media, so they know what it's like to talk to people all over the world and have access to multiple ways of looking at the same issue just because of cultural differences and perspective. So to cut them off from that is extremely detrimental to any branch of this generation, especially in China, because it's such a large part of the generation there. They're just like in Japan, they're going to be experiencing a bottlenecking where they have more people over 65 than 25-year-olds entering the workforce. And so I think that this generation is willing to demonstrate and act out and possibly do damage to corporations or interests in government that they see are oppressive.
So, do you feel that it was somebody within China that actually caused that explosion?
I couldn't say because I don't know enough about it to even comment on that. And so to do that, I wouldn't want to sway the audience in some way because I don't have enough information to speak on that. But just looking at everything that's been happening up until this point, um, we have a tendency sometimes to think about things as isolated incidents. And we also have the tendency to, when we are faced with a situation or an event, because of the way that we think about things, we think that that event somehow correlates to what we already think is happening, confirmation bias. And so because of that, I don't think that anyone could really answer that question, unfortunately, unless the people who did it come forward. Because even in China, the journalists are being, sequestered in the way that they don't have freedom of speech at all, even freedom of the press. So if they say something and it's published and the government finds out about it, that journalist or that media company is going to prison. Someone's going to prison and nobody wants to. And to be honest with you, there's so much going on in the world. As a journalist, you don't want to really stick your neck out if you're in China to get arrested over this one thing because there's so much other things that you could be covering. And I don't necessarily agree with that way of thinking, but I see that in the behavior of what they're producing as far as journalism goes. So I get that. I understand you got family, you don't want to sit in prison, who wants to sit in jail, right? So I think that we don't have access to good quality information that we're left to speculation. And I don't think that the quality of the speculation is enough to entertain too much conversation. Even though it's good to talk about it, it's really all just conjecture.
Well, and it's just very peculiar that the third day in a row, China devaluates their currency. There's this enormous explosion at a chemical plant. But if you look at what's around that chemical plant, there's hundreds, if not thousands, probably more like thousands of cars that were just completely destroyed, brand new cars. And now they're going to have a difficult time with the production of those vehicles. And then I think it was approximately 10 days after that, there is another explosion at another chemical plant in Zibo City, and that was on August 22nd. And then the day after that, there's a giant explosion at a U.S. military base in Japan on the 23rd.
And the way that it's all centered around commerce leads me to my deduction of what I'm seeing, because we've done that here in the United States. Not blowing up chemical plants, but we boycott. We bring down corporations. We make corporations do things they don't want to do simply by voting with our dollars or exposing enough of their shenanigans that they stop doing what they're doing. But in an oppressive government, when you have no ability to do that, you have no laws that say you can do that, what else can you do? And if you sit there twiddling your thumbs and pretending and going to work every day like everything's fine and you know it's not, and you don't want to, maybe you're 20 or 30 years old, maybe you're starting to think about having a family, maybe you might want to have a family in the future, but you can't bring yourself to think about having children in this kind of society and growing up in this kind of world, which is different over there than it is over here. So under that perspective of oppression, I can understand that by attacking the economy, they think that they're possibly achieving some goal that would disrupt enough of the larger businesses and the government cut of those businesses to give them an opportunity to maybe possibly say something in public that they wouldn't normally be able to say.
Right. And remember when we spoke last, you talked about how there was this really good news article that you've actually got on your website, which is occupywallstreet.org. Is that correct?
No,
I'm sorry,
Occupy
Occupy
corporatism.
corporatism. I'm sorry. I had a flashback there from a few years ago when they had those giant, yeah, the all the protesters going around Occupy Wall Street. You're occupycorporatism.org.
.com.
.com. Perfect. So you had an article on there, and I'm sure you still do for those that might want to take a look at it, that shows in pretty good detail about how there's approximately 85 people that control pretty much everything.
Yes.
Do you think that, I know this is speculation, and I really appreciate the fact that you don't want to come out on the record unless you have some very solid data points pointing to that evidence, but do you feel that maybe certain people within those 85, or maybe certain factions that don't want to see the Chinese currency continue to go down for whatever their financial reasons are, do you think that they might have had a hand in that? A little bit of an influence? Just
A hand in
speculatively
the
speaking.
explosions?
Yes, just speculatively speaking.
Well, the explosions would actually hurt them because you have to think about this from the corporate side. Okay, so the multinational corporations who these people would be invested in. Uh, let's just take the cars. Okay, let's say for argument's sake that it was a major manufacturer, a Japanese manufacturer, a Chinese manufacturer, whatever, and they sell those cars all over the world, especially in developed nations like the United States and the UK and Australia and Canada. They would be, those big people would be invested in these multinational corporations, these car manufacturers, and they would not want to see product that could possibly be sold on the market go to waste because they're losing money. So it doesn't make any sense to me that they would be behind that. It's a lot easier. We've seen it with the United States. It's a lot easier to go in and set up a fake revolution and take down the government that way. Except it doesn't always work in every country. So I don't think that it's necessarily this, New World Order, these big 85 guys who want to destroy everything. And ironically, they want to destroy the thing that makes them money. So I just don't get that logic. But I don't think that they would deliberately do something that would cut into their profit margin. And this cuts into their profit margin because they are invested not just in many of the multinational corporations, but they're invested monetarily with currency and with precious metals in China. So it would be cutting their nose to spite their face.
Sure, I've read a lot of information about how China does have many of these minerals and elements and precious metals, etc., that are very valuable around the world, which would make me think that maybe if we're able to get a foothold in China and establish some type of hegemony, it would be a lot easier for us to take over those assets and such as a American corporation or whatever. But one thing that I find very fascinating right now that's going on is, and we're going to jump into another subject here. Hundreds of thousands of refugees right now are seeking asylum in many of the European countries as well as the U.S. and abroad. And most of these people are young males in prime fighting age. There's not a whole lot of women. And I am under the impression that these hundreds of thousands of refugees actually might be enemy combatants. What's your take on that?
Well, actually, I just talked about that on my radio show a couple days ago because my audience had wanted me to comment on this, and I hadn't written any articles about it, so I decided to talk about it on my show. Actually, according to statistics from international groups as well as international journalists such as Vice and AJ Plus on YouTube, the majority of the refugees are children and women, and there are husbands and there are young men there, but the majority of them are children and women, which is the opposite of, in some outlets, what we're hearing. But when you look
That's
at
the
the
total
statistic,
opposite.
exactly. But when you look at the statistics from these international agencies, including Human Rights Watch, even go into the United Nations and look at their statistics, and the places that have taken people, like France and a couple of other countries, Australia. I think we're taking in 1,100, or is it 11,000? I can't remember how many zeros that is, and I apologize. So we've just decided to take in some of these refugees. It's atrocious what is happening to these people. It's disgusting. They're dying in order to get to an internment camp where they're treated like animals, where they're not given medical attention, they're not given adequate sleeping arrangements, and I'm talking about putting people in basically the same room, families and people that aren't related to each other, males and females and children, in just this giant room with cots everywhere. and there's not adequate bathing areas. There's not adequate toilets. They are denied medical care, like I said. There are days where they are not brought food. And I don't agree with everything that um, Angelina Jolie does and says, but she did call this right when she came out and said that the Syrian refugees are being treated like animals. And, why not just kill them off? People seem to forget that Israel extends some of their reach into Syria. Some of the area that they've confiscated for settlements, that reaches into Syria. So it doesn't surprise me. And the countries around Syria are not taking these refugees, except for a few of them that can't afford to take them anyway. So what we're seeing is the systematic destruction of a people. And these people are just trying to get away from their cities and towns that are crumbling. It's either be killed by ISIS or one of these Al-Qaeda, Taliban kind of terrorist organizations, or wait for the US drone program to blow up your house. And so all these people want to do is leave because their cities are crumbling. And when they get to where they're going, if they survive the trip, then they are treated like animals and put into internment camps where there's double barbed wire, and they're lucky if their handlers take care of them, and they can't leave
Are most
because
of them
they're
coming?
surrounded by agents with guns and soldiers.
Are most of them coming out of Syria?
Yes.
Now, there's been chaos in Syria now for several years, though. Many speculate that right now, because of this giant exodus, that there might be people behind the scenes that are actually orchestrating that, such as those that control ISIS. Now, there's a lot of speculation and information that ISIS might actually be controlled by certain factions within the U.S.
Well, here's the funny thing about it. ISIS is not anything new. ISIS has been around a long time. And what the CIA loves to do is when they see something that has potential, they go in there and they make sure that the potential that they see comes to fruition. So the CIA did not create ISIS, but what the CIA has done is gone in there and take a situation that they see they could work out to their favor. And when we were fighting Assad, and go in there and help train them, give them weapons, give them intelligence laptops, phones and satellite communique and all sorts of stuff. But ISIS is really a problem between the Sunni and the Shia. And that argument goes back to 590. So this is not that the government created this. This is that the government is taking an opportunity to make something happen that they want to happen. Unfortunately, like most people find out, if you look back in history, when you start something like a revolution or a war, you can't really control that. You can start it, but you're not going to be able to control how it goes and where it ends and who gets hurt along the way. So now what we have is a huge mess, and it is growing, and it is completely misconstrued. And the unfortunateness of the misconstruing of it lends to its confusion and the detriment of the people who are trying to flee, like we were just talking about the refugees. They are the collateral damage. So maybe we should stop talking about that and start talking about the actual problem that we have in those countries, which is those countries are run by their religion. They are theocracies, and their theocracies are extremely oppressive. Now, they have two factions of their theocracies, the Shia and the Sunni, and one is very conservative, like our evangelical conservative right-wing Republicans here in the United States. And the other side is very liberal, like the liberals, that everybody complains about in the right wing. So those two factions are having a battle that the Protestants and the Catholics had, you know, in the 16th century. Except we're seeing that battle now because it's happening. And it's happening now with all of our technology. Imagine if the Protestants and the Catholics during the 30-year war had access to satellites and drones and all sorts of, ground-to-air missiles and all sorts of stuff. That fight would have been completely different. So take that fight and put it in 2015, and that's what we're seeing now. Now,
Agreed.
the unfortunate part about that for governments like the United States is main exports of oil that we use are centered in those countries. And it is in the interest of the United States and the UK and other countries to make sure that the flow supply does not stop and that the people who are benefiting monetarily from the flow supply are not terrorists. So they have a problem. They've helped these people get to an advanced state that we see today. But like I said, once you let something go, you can't really control it. So you've got about 20 to 30,000 soldiers. That's all ISIS is, 20 to 30,000 soldiers. And yet somehow they are able to take down trained militaries of nations that we know and love. And I just want to bring this up as a side note. Isn't it ironic that the only country that has their own military fighting ISIS right now is Iran? I'm just going to put that out there.
That is ironic. And that brings me to the next question. It was maybe 2.5 years ago, that I saw multiple pictures of Bashar Assad, the leader of Syria, and it showed pictures of him dead, where it's either staged photographs or it's real, but he kind of disappeared in the limelight here in the U.S. as far as publicity after that. And then some people came out and said it was a hoax. Some people came out and said it was real. But what's your information on that? Is he still around?
I don't have any reason to doubt that he's alive. Um,
Did you see those photos from a couple years ago?
no, I have not. But my husband works in graphic arts.
Okay.
And so, and I've seen him manipulate video and audio. And just to prove a point, he took a YouTube video and downloaded it and manipulated it and showed me how you can do this. And we were talking to he has a web developer that he's working with for the for Halo Laboratories, the crystal pure CBD that we sell. And I caught a conversation where they were talking about graphics, and they both the web developer and my husband were talking about how at least 50% of what you see, photographs and video, take it with a grain of salt. It's fake. So the fact that you can go on me, as rudimentary of an understanding of technology as I have, I can go on a website like befunky.com and put in filters and manipulate a picture and spit it back out. And it's an online service that is like Photoshop. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles that Photoshop has, but it's just enough that I can create a meme, which I do on a regular basis. But if I can do that, as simpleton as I am with the programs that are available today, someone with half a brain, I have about a third of one, someone who has half a brain could do tremendous stuff. So I wouldn't take that with any seriousness without corroboration from credible places like obituaries are really good. They usually put things out in the paper or online. But then again, it's very easy because it has happened in the past. And for some reason, we kind of get caught up with this idea that because it happened once or twice, that it happens every time. Like we were just talking about crisis actors. So now people think that nothing happens and that everything is a false flag, which that's not even the definition of false flag. See, the term false flag has been redefined in the alternative media to suit an agenda. But a false flag is actually a government framing another government or faction to do something. And they cause this terrible event to happen, and they blame that government or that faction on it. So there are very few false flags that ever happen. We know Lusitania was a false flag, but it doesn't mean that somebody who down the street kills 3 people, or that gentleman who shot the reporter and the cameraman, that was a false flag. That doesn't even fit into the definition of false flag. So everything that happens on the internet, and the internet is the wild, wild west. Imagine if not only the newspapers, what we consider mainstream legitimate news, but also the Onion and the Inquisitor and the Mirror are all together in the same place, and no one can tell them apart. And so you have good information and you have really bad information, and you have it mixed up together. And because everyone has access to it, and because we have social media and we share so much of it, it all gets lumped up into, oh, it must be true, especially if it comes out of the mouth or the social media account of someone that we trust. So when I see people quoting the Daily Mail, when they're reporting the news, and I'd have to scratch my head because, like, anybody in the UK listening knows that the Daily Mail is a tabloid journal. It's not credible news. It's like the Weekly World News. So anything that comes out of there has to be heavily researched before it's ever reported on, because it's not true. And I know some people say that, tabloids have won a Pulitzer Prize, but just because you jump through the hoop once doesn't mean that you jump through the hoop every time. So we have a lot of misconceptions about things, and really it's because there is an agenda to scare the living daylights out of people as much as possible, because people who are scared are loyal and they buy lots of stuff, especially if they're Americans. Americans think that if they have a problem, there's a product and they can buy it, and when they get that product home and they start using it, all their problems will go away. And we look at media the same way. And the fear mongering has become deafening. in my opinion, because of the internet. Before you had to wait for the 6 o'clock news, you had to wait for Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw, or even before then. I'm a Gen Xer, I'm sorry. But you had to wait for these people at the 6 o'clock news to tell you what was going on. I don't have to wait for them anymore. And my children don't. And nobody does. So we have access to any kind of information we want. And if you want to do research and you want to find information on something, I promise you it's out there. I was just talking with a friend of mine about a very terrible story. They wanted me to cover it on my radio show, but it's really graphic and it's horrible. And I just couldn't do it because even reading the story made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't take it. But that's out there. And just so that you know what I'm talking about, it's a woman who was just arrested. She's involved in a type of pornography that includes murdering small animals. And her lawyers are saying that because she makes videos and she makes money, that this is an infringement on her First Amendment rights to free speech, which is why my friend wanted me to cover it on my show. And knowing that people are out there like that, that think that this is a sexual turn on to them, to the extent that she would be able to make these videos and make a living off of it, that's a sect of people I don't even want to know exists. And I cringe because you would never know who they are. You could be walking down the street. They wouldn't be out there with t-shirts saying, I watch this kind of disgustingness, that I pay for this kind of stuff. They wouldn't want their husbands or wives to know that they do this. So knowing that that is out there and knowing that element is out there really disturbs me. But taking it back to news consumption, that element is out there that simply has a vested interest in your fear of tomorrow. Whether or not it actually comes to pass, they've got a built-in fail-safe for that. Oh, well, I exposed everything, so we got it out there and we changed their plans. No, really? You're talking about people who make billion-dollar trades in a second, and they care about a news outlet that makes them maybe a couple $1,000,000 a year in revenue, and that's not even before overhead. No. These people don't. Bill Gates doesn't care. Elon Musk doesn't care. Any of the Rothschilds do not care. They don't care about what David Icke says about them. They don't care about what Alex Jones says about them. They don't care. They live in a completely different world. If you want to take a look at, and I know that this was a topic that you want to talk about tonight, but look at Donald Trump. He lives in a completely different world than all of us do. He doesn't know the reality that we know. And yet we think that he could represent us.
I remember when
as
Donald
people.
Trump was bald.
You do? I must have been too young. I always remember the swirl.
No, it was 20 years ago. I'm 38 years old. I remember when he had absolutely no hair on the top of his head, and the hair that he has now is real, but they're plugs.
I know that we outed Michael Bolton for something similar to this, and I don't know why he's able to. And he was at an event, and he had some woman come from the audience and look at his hair to say
Yeah.
that it was his. Well, I'm sure that it is. I'm sure that he grows it really long. All I'm saying is he swirls it around his head, and he's probably punching a hole in the ozone with all of the Aquanet that he's using.
You bring up a good point, Suzanne. We live in a society where if you've got enough money, you can do just about anything you want. But I want to jump back for a minute because I watched the first-person view of this shooting that took place in Virginia, where that lady was on air recording somebody, and then this psychotic individual, supposedly his name was Vester Lee Flanagan II. Comes out and busts out a gun and shoots her on camera, and he's got like some type of GoPro or action camera on him as he does the shooting. I watched the footage from him, and I watched the footage from the recorder that supposedly got shot, the video recorder. But I am kind of skeptical in the sense that he is close range to this lady, and he is shooting her supposedly multiple times, and there's no blood. She doesn't flinch. She runs away. If I got shot with a Glock, I'd probably feel it. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of adrenaline going on at that point in time, and she definitely looks sincere, like she wasn't ready for it to happen. And I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it seemed to me like maybe it was blanks. And then I've heard the controversial theories of, well, the powers that be wouldn't use a gay black man to come on live camera and shoot somebody. They'd use a Caucasian person that has a family and is Christian. Well, I don't know. I mean, have you seen the video footage? Have you seen the actual first person where he's got the camera and he walks up and she doesn't even notice him? He pulls out the gun. He's 5 feet away from her, and then he starts shooting her multiple times. And there's no blood. She doesn't. She doesn't. There's no impact. You don't see her, go boom or anything. She just turns around and runs away, and then it disappears.
I have, and it was hard for me to sit through because I'm very squeamish, and I don't even watch horror films, or I don't watch, any of those shows where they cut open people. I can't stand
I
it.
don't either.
But I did watch enough of them as a child to know that there's like a certain response that you have to have, like when you're shot, like in that Al Pacino movie where he's the cocaine dealer. I can't think of the name of that film for some reason. But there's all this blood and guts and everybody gets riddled with bullets.
Scarface.
Scarface, thank you. And it's like bah, 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 and their arms go back and their shoulders. And we always get like the slow motion shot. So we see every impact that happens. I think that we probably don't understand real situations to that extent. Movies and television since the 1950s. And it's been proven even with radio, with Orson Welles.
Right.
We have this issue of mass hysteria. We're all susceptible to it. And the problem with it is the perspective that comes along with it. And when we don't understand what's happening, our brains do this amazing thing. It starts to search for information that we have that looks like or could be attributable to what we're seeing so we can understand what we're seeing. And that happens within a millisecond of a millisecond. It's almost not even measurable. But because we know that this happens, it's hard when we watch these things, we say, oh, well, so and so is not responding the way that we think that they should, or the father doesn't look like he's crying enough. Well, I'm a very compassionate person. When my grandfather died, I was 9 years old and I didn't know how to take it, so I laughed at the funeral. It was completely inappropriate, and I was so nervous and so overwhelmed by this man who took over the role of my father after my parents got a divorce, who was so important to me, such a staple in my life that now was gone, that I had no idea how to react. And as a 9-year-old, you just don't know what to do. And I don't think that doesn't carry on till later on in life. I'm not saying that I laugh at funerals anymore, but I'm saying that the unsuredness of I'm in a situation that I've never experienced before and I have to go through this. And I'm not sure how I'm supposed to react, but I've seen other people react in ways that seem acceptable. And if I can't mirror that in that instance, I'm going to be labeled as unacceptable. And we also have this innate desire to want to be part of a group and not want to be alienated. So all of these things wrap up into what we're seeing when we see these things. And it's very easy. If you already look at the world through everything's a false flag, everything's a crisis actor, everything's fake. If we look through those glasses, we will definitely see what we're looking for. But if we have an expert who understands what happens when someone really does get killed and what it really looks like as opposed to what we've been shown it looks like, even in documentaries where it's supposed to be as real as possible, it's still made for television, it's still made for entertainment, because you're not going to sit there and watch a movie that doesn't look like every other movie you've ever seen. If they deviate from the murder sequence that you've seen 20 times before too much, then you're not going to believe the story and you're going to not like the movie and the movie's going to tank. So when we're seeing things on YouTube, we're looking at them through that same filter. And the only way to get an unbiased opinion is to take the information to an expert and have them review it.
Well,
and that's the unfortunate part about it, that it doesn't happen. That aspect doesn't happen.
right. And that's why I personally took that video to a half dozen people that I wanted to get their opinions. I talked to somebody that actually works for the NSA, that's retired military. I asked him specifically, I said, what are your thoughts if somebody gets shot close range with a Glock? Are they going to show impact? Are they just going to turn and run? And he started to talk about, well, if you're getting shot with a high-powered rifle from 500 feet away, you're going to have a different reaction versus getting shot close range with a 9mm. And he gave me his opinion. I talked to several other people that are very good with, with guns and as far as being good shot, and they gave me their opinion. But I haven't been able to get a opinion from somebody that I know personally has seen somebody shot close range with a pistol. So I don't know. I just find it very peculiar that if you do shoot somebody close range, because like you said, from what I've seen in movies in the past, I've never seen somebody in real life shot, but I've definitely seen it on TV and in the movies. You shoot somebody, bang, they throw back, they fall on the ground, they go, they put their hand over their heart, whatever, and it just seemed very interesting. Do I know it was real? Do I know it was false? No. But it's definitely something that I would question. And the more information that I found about the shooter, Vester Lee Flanagan, which is a very ironic name. He had a stage name of Bryce Williams. I saw a video of him actually doing news reporting from several years ago where he was talking about, basically gun control. And then he's the one that comes out and shoots somebody live on air. And I don't know. It's just so strange anymore. You've got all these different events that take place. Sandy Hook, James Holmes, different individuals that do these shootings, and then you've got one side of the coin where people are going to think everything's a false flag, and then you have the other side of the coin where if it, or as you would call it, not necessarily a false flag, that name's been tailored to meet certain agendas as well, but something that wasn't actually true. And then you've got the other side of the coin where people will believe anything if they see it on the brain drain media. It's probably usually there's somewhere in between a happy medium where that's more close to the truth. I do feel that it's a good idea to question everything and find the information and not just believe everything at face value. But once again, like you said, unless you get a true, somebody that's actually seen that happen before, whatever you come up with is just going to be your speculation.
Right, and this gentleman was in 2009, a court ruled that he is mentally incompetent, that he is mentally ill and unfit. And he should have been put away in probably an institution a long time ago. And yes, he did work for the station, and he is a reporter. And because of that, they have what is it, an IMDb file, where you can go and look them up with actors and people who show up in broadcasting and media. I mean, even alternative media like Gary Franchi is up there, and you could misconstrue him as an actor if something were to ever happen. But he's not. He's a broadcaster. He owns a television studio, and he broadcasts news. But because he's on television, he is part of that guild, and he has a profile up there. So that information can be completely misconstrued if we don't understand it. It can also sort of slip the cracks that this person was mentally ill, and he had delusions of racism and grandeur that contributed, especially complaints against these two individuals. He had a history with these two individuals. So that all of that combined, and the fact that thanks to the NRA, we think that any type of sensible restriction on a gun is an affront to our Second Amendment. People like him have access to guns. And unfortunately, because we've got, at least in my lifetime, and I'm 38 as well, almost 40 years of lots of violence. I mean, when I was a kid, we watched what? We watched Freddy Krueger and we watched Jason,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Some of the most violent movies I think ever made. And yet that was a franchise that was like the biggest thing since sliced bread when I was growing up, and everybody saw it.
Right.
Is it any wonder that after so many years of laxed restrictions on things that should have restrictions on them. I'm sorry. I know that this is not a popular opinion, but just because a manufacturer makes a gun doesn't mean that it's covered under the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment is very specific. It says if you're part of a militia. So if you're not part of a militia, it kind of is a gray area. And over the years, the Supreme Court has ruled on sensible restrictions and understanding. But we tend to think that because a gun is manufactured and that it is available on the market, that we have the right to purchase it. There's a difference between protecting yourself and having a basement full of weaponry that would serve ISIS without any problem. There's
Well,
a complete difference of that.
and wouldn't you agree that, let me get your opinion on this. Some people say guns kill people. Some people say people kill people. If there's a psychopath out there like this Vester Lee Flanagan that's hell-bent on killing a reporter live on air because he thinks they're a racist because of a comment they made, and if he couldn't have access to a gun, I mean, couldn't he have access to a machete or an axe or a jackhammer or a giant rock that he could throw in somebody's face? I mean, there's other ways to kill people. It doesn't just take a gun. And if you, don't get me wrong, I mean, they're definitely, you shouldn't allow psychopaths to have guns. But if you look at places like Chicago, where the gun restriction laws are very high, and yet they've got these crazy high rates of homicides by people that get killed with guns. And those are people that are, not law abiding citizens. They're criminals that have illegal guns.
Exactly. We'll take Dylan Roof. Let's switch over to that one. Dylan Roof would have killed those 9 people with anything that he could have found. And what Dylan Roof's problem is that he's a white supremacist. And this gentleman had a problem with these two, the reporter and the cameraman. So I think that what you're saying is absolutely plausible. If he didn't have access to a gun, it's a lot easier to shoot somebody than it is to, stab them or cut them up. And it would have been probably more traumatic for, obviously for the victims, but for him as well, to be that invasive in his plot. So obviously he took the easy out, which was access to a gun, which he had. But I absolutely agree with you. Dylan Roof would have killed those people with a machete or stapler, or he would have driven his car into the church to run them over. Whatever he could have found. If he could have picked up the pew, he would have picked up the pew and thrown them on top of them and tried to stomp on them. He would have done anything. The fact that this gentleman in the shooting that we're talking about with the reporter and the cameraman was mentally ill is an indicator that, unfortunately, in this country, I know it's really hard for people to understand, but one problem does not necessitate one solution, because you're talking about a person who is a complex organism that doesn't just act on what it's seeing, it acts on what it's seeing based on an entire lifetime of reference. And so if you're mentally ill to begin with and you have a problem with someone and you do have access to a gun and you think that you might want to kill them, that access to the gun makes it easier for you to kill them. But I agree with you. He could have brought a knife or a fork from his house and gone to town on them if he wanted to. So
Right.
gun control does not solve the problem per se, because the problem is also sociological. The problem with Dylan Roof is the fact that we have white supremacists in this country, that we have never dealt with racism, that we've just kind of set up rules and regulations and laws that make it seem like, like affirmative action, make it seem like we're being nicer, but we're not. And Black people make up 14% of the population. And 2/3 of them are disproportionately arrested on anything you could possibly imagine at any given time, literally like right now. And so 14% of the population, where 2/3 of them are arrested, and then more than half of them are put in jail at some point in their life for whatever extent in time. That is a huge problem that we have. And it is a problem with race, and it is a problem with the way that we view people. So with Dylan Roof, he would have done it with anything he happened to have a gun. With this gentleman, he probably would have done it with anything he happened to get a hold of a gun. But the problem with these two also stems into mental illness. It also stems into this ideology of supremacy that we have in this country. We have a lot of problems that we have to deal with. I think that people misconstrue the idea of living with 320 million people in a fairly decent amount of space. I wouldn't say it's too small or it's too big, but there's a lot of us here, and we all have to get along. And some of our generations remember a time before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, before interracial couples were allowed to get married. There used to be a ban on interracial couples. When that was lifted in the 1960s, then all of a sudden people had to accept that Black and whites could get married, Hispanics and Blacks and whites could get married. And we still have the people who remember the separate bathrooms alive today. And a lot of those people are making laws. They're in positions of power. They're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, where they have worked themselves up to CEOs of corporations and of broadcasting industry, as well as in our government, local and state and federal. And so we have to deal with a cultural shift of ideology. While at the same time, we have agenda driven people like politicians who immediately, when something like this comes out, they say, oh my God, we have to restrict the guns, or oh my God, we have to do this, that, and the other. We have to do all of it. And unless we do all of it, we're not going to get rid of the problem.
Well, and see, I live in San Antonio, Texas, which is about 61% Hispanic, and there's a lot of amazing people out here. I have noticed that there's racism with every culture. People, I've met many Hispanics and Mexicans. They're very racist towards white people. I've met Black people that hate white people, and I've met white people that hate Black people, etc. And, in my personal opinion, I think that you should be judged upon your actions and what you do on this planet. Obviously, your skin color has nothing to do with that. But it just seems like lately, at least over the past few years, the media, the mainstream media, is really portraying this picture of if you're white, you're automatically assumed racist. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we put a Black man in office, and the conservatives, who are a large majority of this country, went completely bonkers for the last 7 years. This is something that is absolutely abhorrent to them. And how do I know this? Because they have members of the KKK and the members of the League of the South, who is a just as big of a division of the KKK as the KKK is. And those people donate to politicians and senators and congressmen all the time in the Republican conservative Christian circles. So there's white supremacy in these groups and in these areas. And I'm sure that you see it down in Texas. I have a friend who just left Texas partially because of that problem right there. And this is a white man. And I know this because I grew up in Miami and I had reverse racism where I'm white, but because I have olive skin and dark hair, everyone thought I was Cuban. I was actually fired from a job at a retail store because the morning meeting was held in Spanish. And even though I do speak Spanish, I didn't see the point in admitting that because I work in America and you have to speak English, right? I mean, you could speak Spanish if they just don't understand, but that's different. That's making a concession. It's not a mandate. Well, I was fired from this job because I complained that the morning meeting was held in Spanish and there was no translation for English. And I was the
You were
only
fired?
the person I was fired from that job. It
Unbelievable.
was it was Staples off in
Wow.
Coral Gables in Florida. And this was like decades ago now. But yeah, I was, and I even filed a complaint with the EEOC in Miami, which the gentleman that I was filing the complaint with laughed at me and said, "You know that this is basically a Hispanic area and you're not going to get very far with this." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're going to have to get an attorney to fight this." I
That's
said, "Yeah,
insane.
exactly." So yeah, there is reverse racism. I spent some time in Greenville, North Carolina, and people were surprised that a white woman was nice to black people. And there was a lot of apprehension that I received from black people that I encountered in every single day, like the cashier at a grocery store. They just couldn't understand that this white person just didn't care about what they look like, just who they are.
Right.
So I understand that, and I know, and I think it's because think about how many years people would come home and their father was hanging from a tree in their front yard, or there was a cross burning in their front yard, or my mother, who just recently passed away, she remembered when people had to go in separate bathrooms and separate water fountains. That wasn't that long ago. So there's so much tension over, and think about how we've been treating minorities in this country, and not just Hispanics and blacks, but also Irish and Chinese.
Let me jump in here
And
real quick.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Suzanne. I just want to bring this up real quick because in some cases the minorities have a lot more opportunities than those that are born in the United States. Let's look at some of the grants and financial help that people that come from other countries will be given in the U.S. just because they come from another country. And then you read so many articles about people that come in here illegally from Mexico, get arrested, whether it's a burglary, whether it's a drinking under the influence, they get sent back to Mexico. Yet if you're a American citizen and you get pulled over for going and you have a breathalyzer test that's zero point 0.01 over the legal limit, they're going to throw your ass in jail. You're going to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get out of that. But if you come in here illegally, well, they'll just deport you back.
I understand where someone might see that that's unfair, but statistically speaking, from government officials in the DOJ all the way down to statistics that are taken from your local municipalities, minorities are uh, not only pulled over, harassed, stopped, and frisked more often than Caucasian people, bar none, but spend more time in jail for petty crimes. And most of the time now, the new thing is they put them in a prison. Like there was a gentleman recently who spent 3 years in Riker prison awaiting his initial arraignment trial. And for those 3 years, 2 of them he spent in solitary confinement. And
How
he
is that
hadn't
even
even been
possible?
arraigned
How can they do that?
because we don't speak up, because we don't speak out. Because here's it might seem like an off-topic example, but I think it's pertinent. Uh, I just did an article on my show about debt collectors, and because we think that our debt is standing forever, and we don't understand that some debt, the statute of limitations runs out and you don't have to pay it back. But when a debt collector buys it and they come after you for it, you don't know that you can just file a motion to dismiss, and based on the fact that this debt is old and they can't collect on it, well, phooey on the debt collector, he shouldn't have bought your debt. so what? It's expunged, it's gone. And the complacency also attributes to the law. There was a recent case that I talked about on my show where a officer, Jennifer Martin in Boynton Beach, Florida, went to an Arby's, and I don't know if you heard about this in the news, but she felt like she was being victimized because she's a police officer. She went through the drive-through, and she admitted that the microphone of the drive-through and the speaker was not working very well. She couldn't really understand what he was saying, but she was absolutely sure that he was being curt with her and rude, even though she admits she really couldn't understand him. Well, when she got to the window, it was a busy drive-through, and the gentleman had asked, who was manning the drive-through, asked his manager to help. And so the manager brought the food, and she complained. She took this to an extent where the manager tried to smooth everything over. She pulled her patrol car aside, went into the store, asked for a refund, got the refund, still didn't think that was enough retribution, and filed an offense report for informational purposes, marking that Arby's. Now, her chief of police got a hold of this, probably because she handed it to him. He called the CEO of Arby's. Those two people are now out of a job. The manager, who probably made, maybe close to $30,000 or $40,000 a year, I'm sure his family was dependent on his income. Now he doesn't have a job. The younger gentleman who was manning the drive-through is in his early 20s, but at least he had a job. A lot of kids his age don't have jobs, so now he's out of a job. And if he needed that income, and if he was supporting a family, they're out of that income. Is Jennifer Martin out of a job? No. She gets to keep her job, and she gets to say whatever she wants. And here's the reason why. When she was writing the report, and I read the incident report, it was published online, which included both of the victims' names, phone numbers, address, and driver's license number, which means they're probably getting blackmailed by cyber criminals right now. So that's another unintended or intended consequence of Jennifer Martin. But she wrote, "I responded to the drive-through to pick up a to-go order." Well, nobody responds to a drive-through unless you're responding to your stomach. So she's abusing her power in order to write this report. And I wanted to understand what the word respond means in police jargon. Well, here's something that I found out, and I think everybody's going to find this very interesting. When a cop is on duty, they are in a constant state of response, regardless of what they're doing. And it doesn't just mean that they got the call from dispatch and they're on the way to the scene. It means as long as they're on duty, they are in a state of responding. Now, once they get to the location, they are able to respond. But because they are in a constant state of responding, Jennifer Martin, who, after reading her report and the accounts of the manager and the drive-through attendant, it's obvious that she blew this out of proportion. But because she's in a constant state of response, Jennifer Martin is in the capacity to make something out of nothing because of her authority as a police officer. So just like if you are at a fast food joint and you're buying something and then someone behind you starts scuffling around and they call the police and the police are able to come into the building and detain that person. The same is true if there just happened to be a cop in line with you when the scuffle happened. That cop is in a state of responding even though he's going to get his food. And because he's in a state of responding, he is legally allowed to respond to that scuffle that he's seeing happening in front of him, even though he wasn't called to the scene. So people like Jennifer Martin abuse their power constantly. And we see that abuse of power happening over and over again because people are putting up on YouTube and on Vimeo and even putting things on Vine where they are capturing on their smartphones cops abusing their power, even killing people. And because we're seeing this so much, it's not that it's happening more. It's just that we're able to record it. Before we weren't able to do that. What were we going to do in the 80s? Like bring that giant camcorder around and
Get the
set up the
VHS tape.
tripod? Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. So now we have this smartphone. We just go in our back pocket, flip it out. We can even upload it before the cop gets to the precinct to write his report. And so we're able to see how much injustice is actually happening. But at the same time, like with the case with Jennifer Martin, we don't understand their position and why they feel like they can respond this way. There was a gentleman who was just shot to death, white gentleman, who had the cops on a chase. And when he decided to acquiesce, he was shirtless. He was in his late 50s. And he was, pudgy and overweight. And he had his hands up in the air.
That
and
was in
even
Texas, wasn't it? In like San Antonio, I think.
I think so. And they shot him after his hands were already up and he had already surrendered. And the chief of police said, well, hey, these cops tried everything they could, all the non-lethal weapons. No, you don't stop trying with the non-lethal weapons. Just because you have a gun in your holster does not mean that that's an option. But because we don't understand what a cop is doing while they're on duty, that they're responding, and that once they get to a scene, they can respond. And if a scene happens in front of them, that initiates their ability to respond. We don't understand how these cops are just doing all of this, like right in front of the cameras. You know, like the gentleman who was pulled over by the campus police officer who was 4 blocks off campus. And this guy had the cam on his chest. It's not like he didn't know that was there. And he still shot him in the head.
Wow. You
They know
know,
they're going to get away with it. They know that we don't understand how to fight back. We have been oppressed and we have been pushed back and we've been treated kind of like what we were talking about in China for so long. And the racism and the supremacy ideology that we have in this country over not just minorities, but also women. There's a lot of millennials right now who have opposite roles where the husband stays home and the wife goes out and works. Or even when they get together, before the children, the girlfriend or the fiance makes more money than the man. 30 years ago, that would have been unheard of. And 50 years ago, that would have been impossible. But now the roles of everything is changing, except our ideology isn't necessarily changing. So because we're moving rapidly forward and we're still thinking like we did 50, 70, 100 years ago, there's a conflict of interest. And because of that, there are loopholes created. And people who are nefarious and people who are psychopathic and people who have a criminal bent will take advantage of those loopholes as long as we are in the midst of this fog of confusion as the ideology of our society tries to catch up with the further progressiveness of our technology.
right. And, you know, I've met a lot of very honorable, kind, incredible police officers, you know, fortunately. And it's sad to see these videos of, like you said, this. I saw that video as well, where that older Caucasian guy that's got that giant belly is walking. He's got his hands up in the air, and the cops shoot him. You see that, and if you don't know the whole story, you're like, what the hell is going on? But the media or a video that you see 2 minutes of, there could be a lot of stuff before that that takes place. And I find it interesting that some people will just, like you said, they'll take whatever they can in their mind from what they've seen in the past and create their own reality from it. It's very unfortunate. But, you know, we do live in a society right now that it seems like what's good is bad and what's bad is good. A couple years ago, I heard you talk on a radio broadcast about how a possible bank virus could hit certain banks. And when that happens, be prepared for some type of martial law possibly. Do you still feel that that's something that could take place?
Oh, yes. Look, the banks do not pay for cybersecurity infrastructure like you think that they do. And I've written several articles after that interview. I think that interview was back in 2012. But since then, I've followed this story because I wanted to see what are the real options. And what's coming out in the news is incredible. The banks, JP Morgan Chase, you know, Bank of America, Citigroup, they don't have cyber infrastructure, even basic firewalls to protect them. And then at the same time, they're complaining that they need a cybersecurity bill to keep out the hackers. Well, don't complain that the hackers are hacking in when you don't have the proper protections because you don't want to pay for it and the infrastructure it takes to man it, because you have to pay for the IT guys and you have to set up a whole department and you have to hire a couple thousand people to manage that and work it. I understand if you're JP Morgan or Citigroup, that's, you know, maybe a little bit more than you'd want to cut into the investors' cut every fiscal year, but it's important because we are moving toward digital types of technology as far as currency goes. And the more we look at cryptocurrency and, you know, Bitcoin-like currencies, the more attractive it is to millennials, and it will be to the next generation that's coming up behind them. And we're going to have to deal with this. But the banks are, again, run by 60, 70-year-old, 80, 90-year-old men and women who remember a time before any of this even existed. And they had to do the tax, you know, when they worked at the local soda shop, they had to do the tax by hand and then press it into this huge contraption that spit out, you know, it's like something you would see in a relic shop now. But they remember using that equipment as cashiers. And so how do you tell someone that this complex thing is able to make your life or break your life, and you'll be hard pressed to find out who did it, and the hackers are getting better at it. They're hacking into everything. And some of them are hacking in for nefarious purposes. I mean, the hackers that hacked into Ashley Madison, obviously they dumped everything including personal information on the customers of Ashley Madison. And I don't personally agree with that ethically, because now what's happening is they're being blackmailed by people on the internet because they have all their personal information. Identity theft is happening because of that. So there's intended consequences and there's unintended consequences, but the obviousness is the information that is available to anyone who, and it doesn't have to be some CIA or DIA or NSA hacker. It could be a 16-year-old in high school, and most likely it's probably more like that than it is the government, because the government's busy hacking other countries and hacking other big items. They're not hacking into these everyday things. But because we don't understand how that works, and the people who work with it every day and study it and reverse engineer it and know it, and some of them are security experts and work for companies whose job it is to hack into things, they know this stuff backwards and forwards. And it's a growing number of people who know this stuff backwards and forwards. So these huge companies who are run by these old, decrepit, relic type men are going to have to either, fire all of their CEOs and get some people in there who really do have a grasp, some 30 or 20 something year olds, and have them work the system so that we can protect ourselves, or we're going to see more hackers. And because the banks are going to make money either way. They're investing in cryptocurrency too. JP Morgan 12 years ago put out a patent for a cryptocurrency like exchange. And even people like Bill Gates, he says that Bitcoin is better than gold. Lots of people like Berkshire Hathaway, independent of Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett himself has moved money into cryptocurrency firms. So we're seeing a massive push by people who have money into this new digital technology. Whether or not we agree with it, I'm not going to get into that argument, but it is happening. The problem with that, like I said, is there are people who live and breathe this stuff, and they know how to get into your computer, and it's really not that big of a deal for them. And they're able to mirror their the servers that they use. So they're able to go from where they originate to anywhere in the world and bounce off of servers. They could bounce off as many servers as possible. It's called mirroring, in order to get to their location. So it would take the FBI all of that time to undo all of the mirrors. So the more mirrors you have, the harder it is to get a hold of information. That's why I always laugh when it's been like a couple of days and the FBI comes out and says, like with the interview, remember that film? And they were like, oh yeah, no, we're totally sure it was North Korea. There's no physical way possible that they could have known, because technology experts came out and said, we work with this stuff and we would have needed months or possibly half of a year to come out with information to say who did it. And the FBI all of a sudden knows within less than a week. That's not even possible with our current technology, unless they have like technology that we don't know about. I don't know, that's possible. Maybe there's AI computers and robots running around there. I don't know. I don't want to speculate on that. But as far as human abilities go, first of all, we're not protecting ourselves because it's not advantageous to a corporation to spend all of that money. And when I say like hiring IT guys and setting up a department, they have to do that in like multiple locations, like all across the world. And then they have to shift all of their information. I just had a woman tweeting me today about her bank was shutting down for maintenance. And she said, oh my God, is this it? And I said, well, send me the link to what you're seeing, because I want to be able to read the entire thing in context. And all they're doing is they're updating their system to work with mobile applications, because everybody's using their smartphone to do banking. Whether or not that's a good idea, people are. So this bank is just putting in infrastructure so that the mobile apps on a smartphone can correlate with the online banking on the servers, and they don't get any cross or misunderstandings as far as the computer systems go. So if you do a transaction on your phone, it shows up on your account on the server at the bank, and they needed 5 hours in order to implement this infrastructure. But she completely misunderstood that and misconstrued it. She read the first couple of lines of the notice from her bank and freaked out and tweeted me. Now, I completely understand that, because a lot of people do. We're all waiting for it, and it's not happening. And we're getting frustrated, and we're getting more and more scared, because if it hasn't happened yet, and we've been told that it's going to happen, and when is it going to happen, and we're looking for it. But if you read just the entire, and it was like 2 paragraphs, it was really like a half a paragraph and a full paragraph. Technically, it was like 3 sentences and then 7 sentences. That's 7 sentences. 5 to 7 is technically a paragraph, right? So if she had read the whole thing, she would have seen that it's innocuous. But because she's waiting for that, she's waiting for the collapse. She's been told that there's a collapse coming. She's waiting for it. She's not thinking clearly. And we're seeing that reaction all over the place. And it doesn't help that the banks are not putting in the infrastructure that they need. And it's not helping that Joe Blow down the street in his parents' basement can hack into JP Morgan or the Federal Reserve. I mean, think about this. We've seen the DOJ hacked into, the Federal Reserve, the Department of Energy, the internal servers at the White House. And I'm telling you, this is not all just governments doing this to each other. This is normal, everyday people who do this when no one's looking in the middle of the night, so to speak, if you're watching Mr. Robot or something like that.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
yeah.
and I'm glad.
Isn't that a great show?
I'll tell you, I've seen every episode, and it seems like it's more provocative every episode you watch. It's either gay sex, murder, breaking out people from prison, hacking into the giant evil corporation, whatever. I mean, it's there's definitely a lot of stuff in there, and I think it's a incredible series. It brings up a lot of points, but I'm glad you brought up Mr. Robot, because if you look at the Hollywood media, there's so many movies and TV shows that have came out with certain events that take place that actually do happen. Let's go back to the movie Knowing with Nicolas Cage, where not only did that movie portray the Fukushima event, but it also portrayed the Gulf oil spill literally to a T. If you watch the movie Knowing, there's a certain scene in there where Nicolas Cage is sitting down and he turns on the TV, and on CNN you can see the oil
the rig?
The oil rig, thank you.
Yeah.
I just got put under mind control there for a second. When you the oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, literally, you can watch this on Knowing. Don't take my word for it. Just Google it. Watch the movie. There's an event that takes place on 4/20, the exact same day that the oil rig has an explosion in reality. And in that same movie, if anybody knows about the Fukushima disaster that took place, 3/11/11, there's many synchronicities that portray that event taking place as well. So if you do your research, you can find out that not only does the CIA, the Department of Defense, the military have a lot of influence in Hollywood, because not only will they give them funds and tanks and certain weaponry or planes or whatever to make their movies, as long as they follow their skit. There's a lot of people that think that what happens in the media, they portray something, an event that will take place to desensitize the population. So when it does happen, they're more accepting and willing to let it happen, as well as, oh, well, I saw it on TV, so it's just Hollywood. The TV series Mr. Robot, there's that bank virus that takes over all the credit cards and banks, similar to what you talked about a couple years ago. And I am wondering if that's something that they're pushing as an agenda to take place possibly within the next few months.
Well, it would be reverse engineering, because that technology exists. 3 years ago, when I wrote a corresponding article to that interview, and the gauze virus at the time was able to do that, and it was doing stuff like that on PayPal. And because your bank account is hooked up to your PayPal account, it was compromising your bank account. So that technology exists long before Mr. Robot ever came into fruition. And a lot of people tend to reverse engineer things without realizing we're bombarded with so many images. I mean, think about this. You and I are 38 years old. So we have 38 years of images of all sorts of stuff that we've completely forgotten, but our brain has not forgotten. And when we see something that is similar to it, we attach to it. And of course, because of chance, there's a statistical probability that you're going to be right about some things. But if you look at movies as a whole and you look at their predictive possibility, it's no different than the Bible code applied to Moby Dick. You're going to find hidden messages in Moby Dick if you apply the Bible code to that book.
I read about that.
Exactly. And the problem is, and it's a problem that we all have and nobody can wake up against it, it's our brain. It's the way that our brains are made. We are lodging information all the time. And like I said, if it's a situation that seems similar, or it's something that we could correlate to something else that we know about, we do so. And when we find an event that is similar to something that we just saw, we attribute those instances together, even though if we sat down and took a look at every aspect of what we're discussing, we would find the inconsistencies in them.
Well, let me jump in here just real quick. I'm sorry, but this is one thing that I wanted to bring up to you. Family Guy, the TV series Family Guy. If you remember a short while ago when Robin Williams committed suicide, the same day that he committed suicide, there was an episode of Family Guy that came out portraying him attempting to commit suicide.
Okay. But that cartoon was drawn and written, the script for it was written, the storyboarding a long time before his suicide. So if we were to take that at face value, what we would have to say is somehow somebody at Family Guy, maybe even Seth MacFarlane, knew that Robin Williams was going to commit suicide that way and decided to write it into the script. Knew that he was going to do it that day, knew how he was going to do it, and then decided to put that in as part of the show. That's the only way that it could have aired the same day that he committed suicide, and there be a correlation to that. So we would have to find out if somebody of enough influence knew uh, Robin Williams and knew what he was going to do and the exact day that he was going to do it and the way in which he was going to do it, and knew that in enough time to get that written into the script and approved and go ahead and produced and part of the show. The fact that it aired the same day is just a coincidence, unless somebody knew. And that means that other questions open up. Like, who did Robin Williams talk about his suicide with? Did he talk about it with someone who works on the show? Was he talking about it with multiple people and maybe trying to ask for help? This opens up a whole new can of worms. So to say that that is a truth of some prediction that they were trying to tell us something, we have to answer all of these other questions. And that's a lot of the problems with some of these theories. To take that theory and say, okay, let's say that holds water. Well, what about all of these answers? Because nothing happens in a bubble. So how do we account for all of these things that had to happen in specific ways in order to make this happen? And that's where these theories just completely unravel. And part of the problem is, and in my opinion, it's a large part of it, but I'm just going to be conservative and say that it's part of it, is that we don't think things all the way through to the end. We don't think we see something happen and we think that it has a correlation, but we don't really think it all the way through to the end. We don't ask the questions that surround it enough to get enough evidence to show that it's true. And we just take it at face value and say, wow, that there's no way that that could be just a coincidence, but coincidences happen all the time. Um, People find pictures of people that look like you and it's not you, but because there's only so many different ways the DNA could be combined, we do have people that occasionally have no genetic connection to each other and look like they are identical twins. We have people look at those pictures. I love those pictures.
I've
Have you ever
seen
seen
them.
those where like Nicolas Cage
Hmm.
was in the Wild West?
Yes.
You know,
Like from the
it
1800s,
never
Nicolas Cage looks exactly the
dawns on
same.
people.
Did you see
Right,
that
right,
video
because he's a
from? Yeah,
vampire.
right. Yeah, he's a vampire. Yeah, he's gonna live forever. I don't know. I just let me interject here again, Suzanne. I watched a video of Lil Wayne a month before James Holmes came out and killed all those people supposedly in the Colorado theater. But a month before that happened, there's Lil Wayne in this video bouncing around a movie theater where there's 12 skeletons, the exact same amount of people that supposedly got killed by James Holmes, and Lil Wayne's bouncing around. And at 2 minutes and 42 seconds, please don't take my word for it, just watch the video. At 2 minutes and 42 seconds, Mr. Lil Wayne's bouncing around and he says, "Going death." And it sounds like he says gun death. And he's jumping around 12 skeletons in a movie theater. And then a month later, you see this stuff on the TV where James Holmes supposedly kills 12 people. And then you see another episode, and now I'm going to jump into Family Guy again, the Boston Marathon bombings that supposedly took place where hundreds of people lost their limbs. There was a Family Guy episode a couple weeks before that happened. It might have even been just the week before it happened, where Peter, the big fat guy, the main character in Family Guy, he hooks up with a jihadist terrorist, and then he runs and plows through a bunch of people in the Boston Marathon in his car. I mean, just these weird synchronicities. So it's either A, a conspiracy, B, a coincidence, or C, maybe all this stuff was staged and orchestrated to create this mass psychosis and hypnosis to the masses. But that's just my opinion.
And you know what? I would say that it's all of the above. And that's pretty shocking, right?
Sure.
I would say that it's all of the above because the idea that we all have that they tell us stuff before they do it stems from going all the way back. It stems from a religious idea that
Right. Exactly.
Satanists, for some reason, have to tell you what they're going to do before they do it because otherwise they go against their pact with Satan or whatever.
Well, that's
So,
actually from the Talmud. The
right,
Talmud states that if they express what they're going to do before they do it, then they have no karmic influence based upon what they do.
right. And this has been adopted by other religious sects as
Sure.
well. And I think that, first of all, you have to believe that. So that opens up a whole new can of worms. Because now we have to prove the validity of Satan, and now we have to prove the validity of God in order for that to be true. Second of all,
Or just psychopaths that wrote the book.
psychopaths don't tell you what they're going to do, though. Psychologists, and I've studied psychopathy for many years now. Uh, Thomas Sheridan has written some incredible books on it, and I've gone farther than what he's researched, and it's amazing what psychopathy is. But psychopaths don't tell you what they're going to do before they do it. They're the their key thing that they do. One of the most prominent characteristics of a psychopath is that they will completely convince you that they are the exact opposite of what they are. So there is no guilt. They can actually turn their empathy on and off at will. They don't feel bad. So that idea that the psychopaths have to tell, they don't have that guilt and that empathy. They don't care about human well-being like normal people do. So again, that doesn't even hold water. So we have to go back to the instances with Family Guy and the terrorist. Well, go back in history. Middle Eastern terrorists have been blowing stuff up for a really long time, and it's almost become a caricature of them. When we see a Muslim terrorist, you think explosions. It's almost become a joke. And so to make that assertion goes all the way back to the 1980s when Reagan was in charge. And the people who make Family Guy are probably within that time period where they were teenagers or young adults during the Iran-Contra scandal and during the hostage situation where we saw things blowing up, we saw people being killed, we saw Middle Eastern people doing it. And so now that we're 30, 40 years old, now we can joke about it. It was a marathon, but it wasn't the Boston Marathon. But because we are programmed to think that they're Satanists and that they belong to the Satanist cult, which again means that I have to believe in the God Satan paradigm. And in order to believe that they are Satanists and they are doing this and they're telling me about this because they have some conscience that they have to clear before they go ahead and do that. Well, when you look back in history, especially with religious organizations, if you want to say that that is true, I don't remember reading about like right before the Spanish Inquisition happened. I mean, I wasn't there, but I've studied this quite a bit. And I don't remember anything like a pamphlet or like a news article that they were going to do this before they started doing it. They just kind of started doing it. And it lasted for so many years that people got used to it. So we misconstrue events. We attribute events to things because we can't understand that we live in a world where people do strange things. We separate ourselves with this idea of consciousness entitlement, that because we're conscious and nothing else is conscious, that we have some monopoly on consciousness and we are some moral high ground, and that we have the audacity to create a moral high ground and then demand that everyone rise up to that. It it's absolutely ridiculous. We behave like animals because that's what we are. We do it differently because we are able to think differently than other animals. But I'll give you an example. The only reason why a chimpanzee, a gorilla, and a bonobo can't talk like we do is because they're missing a bone in their throat. That's it. If they had that
Right.
bone, they'd be talking. Another interesting thing about chimpanzees, especially uh, when juxtaposed with humans, is chimpanzees don't ask questions, even when they're taught sign language. They don't ask, when you give them information, they don't ask questions about it. A toddler, if they're speaking, will start to ask you questions. You can point to an object, and your dog or a dog will go to that object. If you put two bowls upside down with a treat underneath one of them and point to the one that has the treat, the toddler will go to the one you're pointing to. The dog will go to the one you're pointing to. The chimpanzee will not. The chimpanzee will just do what it thinks it can do to get the treat. The difference between the toddler and even the dog, and because dogs have been with us for a very, very, very long time, we've actually altered their evolution because of the time that they've spent with us. But chimpanzees have not spent a lot of time with us in intimate situations, and I'm not talking about sex, I'm just talking about in living conditions like dogs have and toddlers. So they don't have the same evolutionary development that we do. They don't understand that I might have information that you don't, and by listening to me, you could learn something. They don't ask questions. They think they know everything and they'll figure it out. If you teach a chimpanzee to use a tool, even a rudimentary tool like a stick, and stick it into a hole to get ants out, like an appetizer, the other chimpanzees will watch that chimpanzee and not mimic it. But if you put toddlers in a room and you give a toddler a special tool, the toddlers will watch that toddler, see how successful they are, and what's the next thing? They start fighting over it, right? Because they all want it. This is because humans understand that you have information that I don't, and I might be more successful if I watch and copy you and possibly even usurp that tool that you're using and try it out myself. Dogs understand to a degree that we have information that they don't, and that is advantageous to their survival. So they listen to us. But chimpanzees do not. And yet we are 98.999%, our DNA is identical. So the differences in the animals is not that great. And yet because we have these differences, because I'm able to talk to you in a language that we've created, and there are thousands of languages spoken all over the world, and there are even more that have stopped being spoken over time, because we're able to build cities, because we're able to make toilet paper instead of just grabbing a leaf off of a bush, we think that we have somehow have an entitlement on consciousness. And this extends even to the idea that, hey, sometimes people do bad things. And there's no real explanation for it other than sometimes people do bad things. Now, in the society that we have that's set up so precariously, where all of our economies are interconnected, and what China does affects Canada, and what Canada does, I mean, just think about the securities scandal in 2008 that caused the stock market crash that almost literally brought the entire globe's economy to its knees.
Right.
And that was done by a couple of bankers here in the United States. We are so interconnected with each other that we have to come up with this other reason for the bad things that happen. And it's not just in our modern times. We've been doing this ever since civilization. Ever since we created civilization, we have created this idea that there's something else that creates all of these bad things. And if we just get a hold of that bad thing, we can stop the bad things from happening. But we've tried to get a hold of that bad thing for centuries, and it doesn't stop the bad thing. What the problem is it's a crisis of humanity. It's a part of who we are, and some of us don't enact it, and the majority of us don't enact it. But there are a small few, and statistically speaking, over large scales of time, it's really like less than a 0.%. But there are a group of people who, over time, and it's come in various forms, are evil, as we would consider evil to be, even in the biblical sense, and do things that are affront to the progress of society and humanity as a species. And we cannot understand why they behave that way, why they create destruction, why they murder. There was a gentleman who was just arrested in Alabama. He had 2 women that he had taken under his wing. This is considered a cult situation. He had completely brainwashed these women. He had fathered 12 children. And during this time, he raped and physically abused his own children, including the women. And even after everything was said and done, the authorities came in and everyone was separated, the women are still in love with the man. And even though he hurt their children, and I'm speaking as a mother, if someone hurt my child, I can't even say that on the air. But these women were, and I'm sure that they're good women, but the brain is very precarious. And this man was able to convince them to allow him to not only abuse them, but the children that he sired, 12 of them. And yet this was okay for them, and it's still okay. They want to get back with him and have their life and have the children back together, and everything's okay. Look at the followers of Charlie Manson. And I know this was before both of our time, but those women paraded in the streets. They showed up at the courtrooms. Anything he did in jail, they mimicked out in real life. They carved the swastikas into their foreheads just like he did. And we can't imagine why, because most of these girls came from well-to-do families. They were not in a position to, their stupidity had to be chosen because they had lots of opportunities.
Right.
But there's something about us that allows us to suspend all logic and reasoning simply because we believe something to be true. We look for it with our confirmation bias. And once we find it, then we can sit back pretty and say, okay, well, that's the reason why. And the best part about the New World Order and the Satanism and all that predictive stuff is that there's nothing you could do about it. So it's like this, it's this never-ending frustration for people. that like, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't be part of life and I can't enjoy the time that I'm here because I know it's finite. I know that it's going to end, but
Are
I
you
can't enjoy it because I have to be afraid of 85 people who, for all intents and purposes, during my small portion on this planet, is not really ever going to affect me.
Well, are you referring to what you just said? You're referring to the mass populace that says there's nothing they can do about it. Are you referring to basically like Revelations that says, okay, this is going to happen. Basically, everybody's going to die, but it's prophecy, so just accept it.
Well, that's the funny thing about Revelation. There's two of them. Now, Peter's version did not end up in the Bible because it has a happy ending.
Exactly. Exactly.
But
I'm glad you
John's end
brought
up
that
in the
up.
Bible. Yeah, exactly. it's it's all subject, even what we believe about all of these things, going back to, okay, well, in order to believe that, I got to believe in the God Satan paradigm. Even that is manufactured. I believe what I believe about the end times because they chose one story over another. Peter's was a happy ending and everybody was like running through the field and holding hands and laughing and it was beautiful. That's not good. That doesn't help if you want to control people. That doesn't help if you need money to keep your organization going. And you're a nonprofit, so you need people to tithe. You need people to invest in what you're doing. And plus, you have all of the armies and all of the money anyway. The kings and all of the subjects work for you. So, in order to maintain that, you have to come up with a really good story that scares the crap out of people. And if they're not scared by your story, then they're going to obey the laws of the government. They got you either way. You're either going to do it here today or you're going to burn in a lake of fire for all eternity. And before scientific revolution, before real sound scientific applicable in our everyday life revolution in technology and science, we really lived under a superstitious rule. And we just really weren't sure about, hey, maybe that guy's right. I don't want to take that chance. I love my wife. I love my kids. I don't want them to burn in hell. We're just going to do what we should do. We're going to pay what we should pay. We're going to believe what we should believe. We're going to adhere to whatever laws. But all of that was cherry picked to begin with. Here's something that I found very fascinating. Um, did you know that the Bible allows for women, or I'm sorry, for husbands to have a priest perform an abortion if he suspects that his wife has been unfaithful and the child is not his?
Well, let's go a step further. Did you know that in the Bible it says if your child is a non believer, you should stone him to death?
All right, Kim Davis has been married 3 times. She should have been stoned to death by now.
Yeah, I just, my personal feelings on the Bible. This is a whole other subject, but if you read the Old Testament, even the New Testament, the Old Testament, there's places in there that says God commands Adam, or not Adam, but one of his prophets to kill every man, woman, and child, and even the livestock, because they supposedly had sex with fallen angels. And if God, the divine providence, the creator of all, is all knowing, why would he create somebody that he would then have destroyed in a barbaric fashion? I just don't understand that.
Oh, I agree with you. Noah, did he really have to? Isn't he omniscient and all powerful? Couldn't he just have them just die? Like M. Night Shyamalan did that in The Happening. Why can't God do it? You know?
It just doesn't make logical sense for somebody that is not stuck underneath this mind control. And this might upset many Christians and people that are believers. And hey, if that's your belief, I respect that, and that's fantastic. I question that. That's my opinion.
Oh, I absolutely question it. And I've studied religions since I was 12 years old. And I have not found one religion, whether it's practiced now or practiced in the past, that was not created as a control structure. And I have also found no actual evidence of any of their claims ever being true, regardless. Did you know that just recently they found the oldest version of the Quran? And did you know that it predates Muhammad?
Doesn't surprise me.
So either the Muhammad story is completely made up, or at some point they realized that nobody was digging this religion, so they had to come up with a mascot. So maybe they got a hold of some dude named Muhammad and said, "Hey, you're going to be the leader of this religion. We need a reboot. We need a rebranding because it's just not working out very well." But regardless of that, if you believe that a gentleman looked into a hat at some stuff that nobody else could see and read off scripture and then couldn't repeat it verbatim, if you believe that a gentleman who could not read or
My gold
write,
tablets disappeared.
yes, exactly. If you believe that a gentleman who could not read or write, and I'm talking about Muhammad, And the angel Gabriel repeated the scriptures to him for 23 years until he finally figured out how to write and wrote it down. There's such a huge suspension of belief. And that's just two. You know, we could talk about all the other spin-offs. If you really believe that that underwear protects you from bullets and knives, test it out. In fact, I did a story on my show a couple weeks ago because there's actually underwear that can protect you from bullets, and it's not manufactured in Utah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
It was three different instances where the underwire in the woman's bra actually, because of the trajectory of the bullet, it bounced off her underwire and did not lodge into her body. Isn't that amazing? So I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe the Mormon Church should call up the manufacturer and see who that is. Maybe they want to get a good deal, and maybe they can make their magic underwear with these guys because that actually repels bullets.
Well, I got to say, most Mormon people are incredible people. They give you the shirt off their back. They're very kind. They're very loving. They're not all married to 5 women in the back hills. I think that's the Hollywood propaganda. But yeah, I have some friends that actually had an opportunity to get some of that, some of those magic underwear, as you would call them, and they tie-dyed them and sent them to some friends in Utah.
That's awesome.
It was awesome. So, but hey, I mean, I certainly feel that everybody has a right to believe in what they want to. And if we all thought the exact same way, we would be assimilated by the Borg. And I don't feel that's the right thing to do. I think it's a good thing that people think for themselves. But that's what they need to do, is actually think for themselves and not be succumb to some system of, well, I read it, so it must be true.
Oh, exactly. Well, I that refers me back to a interview that Stephen Colbert just did right before he started hosting the late night on CBS, and they were talking about his philanthropy, and he said, "Well, I'm a devout Catholic, and that's what Catholics are supposed to do." Well, that's ironic because a lot of Catholics are not like him. He had Jeb Bush scheduled for his show, and so Jeb Bush used that opportunity to advertise to his future constituents to donate $3 to his campaign, and one of them could win the right to ask a question of him on the air. Well,
Oh,
I know, right? Well, uh, when Rand Paul was doing that filibustering on Capitol Hill against the U.S. Freedom Act because the sunset was going down on the Patriot Act, Section 215, that gave the NSA the right to spy on everyone. That filibuster, well, Rand Paul used that as an excuse to get people to donate at least $20.16 to his presidential campaign in lieu of him filibustering for his future constituents.
what are your thoughts on Rand? I had to interject real quick.
You know, there seems to be a history in the Paul family that running for president is a quick money maker. Um, it just came out recently that Jesse Benton, who worked with his father's campaign, laundered money and fraudulently used some of the money that was donated to lobby people to give endorsements of Ron Paul when they weren't going to. But because they got a couple $100,000, they said, okay, well, I won't endorse Michelle Bachmann, I'll endorse Ron Paul. And this was a senator, I can't remember his name or what state he was from. But this Jesse Benton was now working for Rand Paul's campaign. And Rand Paul came out and said, oh, it's a conspiracy, the government, the Obama administration. Now, twice, Ron Paul punked the American public into giving him millions of dollars in order to run for president. And twice, he told his future constituents, hey, I wasn't really running for president. I just wanted to interject information into the public discourse,
Are you
which is
serious?
exactly, yes.
Wow.
When he bowed out, he said, hey, I didn't really intend to be president. I just wanted to have certain things out there. And now we're talking about bankers. Now we're talking about the global elite and everything. So that's a good thing. So, good for me. Thanks for the money.
Thanks
He
for your
didn't
money.
he did it twice. So his son has twice used his filibustering in order to gain donation money for his presidential campaign. And I don't think that that family has any intention of actually becoming president. I think they found out that because people are disenfranchised with our government and because the people who would support Ron Paul, a large majority of them, not all of them, listen to Alex Jones, who has propped up that family for a lot of years now, think that that's a good bet and they're betting it with their dollars. And a lot of those people can't afford to bet that with their dollars. I think he's going to walk away with lots of money and say, hey, I just wanted to interject information in the public discourse.
Well, and that I'm glad you brought that up because that brings us to the next subject. I know we're getting on limited time here. I hope you can spend some more time with us here,
Oh,
Suzanne.
yeah, as long as you want.
Great. You've got people like George Salente. Alex Jones, Steve Quell, Lindsay Williams. And every week, every day, it's, oh, the world's going to end. It's World War III. We're almost going to die. The apocalypse is right here. Buy gold. Get out of the stock market. I remember when I had a chance to listen to Max Kaiser a few years ago when the Occupy Wall Street was going on. He was telling everybody, hey, throw your dollar bills out in the street. They're not worth anything. The U.S. dollar isn't worth anything. Just get rid of it. Throw it all away. And I'm thinking to myself, that's strange, because if I had $100,000 in cash right now, I could go buy a lot of stuff with that money. It's good. If I had $1 million, I could go buy an estate. I could buy a Lamborghini. I could buy all sorts of stuff. But you're telling me it's not worth anything. Do you think that these guys are, I don't know, I guess you could say jokers?
Yeah. Absolutely. It always surprised me. Going all the way back to when I first started working in alternative media, what does the alternative media and truth media have to do with gold and silver? That never, ever
Right.
made any sense to me. Because the gold markets, the precious metal markets, are controlled by the bankers, not just JP Morgan, but central bankers and governments. In fact, going all the way back to 2012, China was buying gold like it's going out of style because they were setting up the BRICS nation, the BRICS banks, and under the BRICS nations, and they needed collateral in order to prop up this new bank that they have now started. So why would I want to invest my money, the little bit of money that I have, the fiat that I can now trade, even though it's worth nothing, but it's still tradable. I can still get a gallon of milk for my babies so they can have cereal. They can't eat gold coins, and gold coins really aren't worth anything. If you know anything about precious metals, you don't buy coins, you buy bullion.
Right.
And who can afford that? But okay, so Kaiser, we'll use him as an example before we go on to Salente. Kaiser, remember when he was buy silver, put JP Morgan out of business,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
he invests in silver heavily, in silver futures.
No.
Yeah, so when he says buy silver, you're making him a crap ton of money because he's buying on what the future price of it will be, and he's telling you now to buy silver.
But he's trying to protect you.
No, he's telling people to buy cryptocurrencies, and he owns two cryptocurrency brokerages and four patents, all of them that he leases out to cryptocurrency firms. So when he tells you that Bitcoin and Dogecoin and all those other coins are a good investment, it's because his firm makes a crap ton of money on it.
Wow. It's unbelievable. And then here's the thing, you've got this enormous amount of individuals. So many people can go on the internet and look up anything. You know, you can be 7 foot, if you're a guy, you can be 7 foot tall, bench press 500 pounds, have $100 million in the bank, all because you put it on the internet. So it's like there's so much good that can come from the internet, but there's also a lot of misinformation. And because there are gullible individuals that have been taken advantage of in the past, then they're going to hear people like Max Kaiser that comes out and says, "Oh, buy gold because the dollar is going to collapse and we're getting ready to go to World War III." And they use these psychological neurolinguistic programming tactics to brainwash the masses to take advantage of them.
Absolutely, they do. It's Salesman 101. Don't forget that. I mean, I know that you're aware of this, but for anyone listening, Max Kaiser used to be one of the douchebags he talks about. And so was Gerald Celente. Gerald Celente decided, hey, I can't work with you guys because you guys won't let me in your White Shoe Boy Club. So I'm going to start my own deal. And he started the Trends Journal and he started becoming this trends predictor. But if you go back and look at his track record, which I have, it's really bad. He's not even better than statistical chance. And that's pretty hard to do because statistically, you should be at least as good as chance. So he tells us that there's going to be a collapse, and he comes out periodically, like every 3 or 4 months, and pushes this media blitz. But nobody realizes that this is his retirement fund. He invests in gold futures and silver futures, and he shorts the stock by then betting against the US dollar and going out into the media and talking about a collapse. Now, I can't verify that the trades that he's making and the bets that he's making correspond with when he suddenly comes out in the media and does his blitz. But he admitted in 2010 to Business Insider that this is his retirement fund, that this is what he plans on retiring. And we've seen his set. We've all seen his show on YouTube. We see him coming out in those
He's
the
on Russian
ascots.
Today all the time, RT Today.
He lives in a wealthy part of New York. He owns a building that is a historical building, so you can't just buy that with like $50,000. The man is wealthy. And he's wealthy because he's been betting against the US dollar for decades, and he's been buying futures on precious metals. And since he started the Trends Journal, he's been going out and talking about how the collapse is coming and you have to buy gold and silver. But he doesn't say outward buy gold and silver. He says, I buy gold and silver. That's where my money is. But it just so happens that he's on GCN, who is owned by Midas Resources, a company that happens to be a gold and precious metals broker. Oh, how fortuitous. So, and none of this is arbitrary. And if we're, it's kind of
You're a
funny because we talk.
conspiracy theorist, Suzanne.
I am, I'm a weird conspiracy theorist because I can see the psychological underpinnings of what we were talking about before about things happening in the movies and then happening in real life. But when someone tells me that this is their retirement fund and their predictions are worse than chance, and yet still they're wealthy, they're doing their thing, they're selling their stuff. The Trends Journal costs tons of money. It's not cheap. And he only does certain interviews with people because of the audience size. And the fact that he's betting on the future sale of gold and silver as opposed to what it's worth now, and his insider information by doing these trades on the stock market, by shorting the market in precious metals, by betting against the US dollar simultaneously. See, he wins either way. If we all put our money in gold and the value of the dollar goes down, he wins because he bet against it. If we all buy gold, he wins because he purchased the future sale of what it would be, and he was able to mark up the price in time to get delivery on that sale because that futures has a birth date and an end date. So I'm really concerned why the SEC has not fined him because of the nature of what he does. He's obviously creating a market, a false positive or a false negative at any given time, and swaying the market enough to make him I hate to repeat myself, a crap ton of money, and been able to do this for decades now. And I would really like to see the SEC come down on him. There are rules and regulations of what he can and cannot say, and he breaks those in such an eloquent way, I think. And what's interesting to me, and I know we were talking about this before the show, it seems like he wrote this script 2 or 3, maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And he goes through the same script every single time. There's maybe a little bit of changes, but eventually you hear the same maybe 7 or 8 key phrases. And that, and I know that you know this, is neurolinguistic programming. When you repeat the same thing over and over again in the same inflection, in specific points in your conversation, go back to that point, find a way to loop the conversation to get back to that point, then you are programming the audience to think about this. And every time they hear it, it sticks better and better into their brains. So when they go and they see an article on InfoWars or Drudge Report or Max Kaiser or wherever else, and they hear Steve
SteveQuail.com.
Quayle, Steve Quayle is so wealthy because of gold.
Well, and I just got to jump in here because you brought up NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Many people haven't heard of that, but if you'd like to do your research, just Google NLP. And basically what NLP is, for those that don't know what it is it's like a manual for the brain. It's a way to understand the mind and what makes people click, what makes people excited, how you can make people depressed, etc. It's a sense of programming, and you have people out there that every 3 or 6 months will come out and say, oh, well, the world's about ready to end. The Russians are going to invade us. They've got 300,000 troops in Canada and Mexico right now disguised as UN, and they're getting ready to invade.
Exactly. And that's why repetition, NLP, it all works. Most people have woken up to another dream. And it's very, very difficult. And I know because I have worked with all these people. All these people that you're talking about, I've known them. And I know what douchebaggery goes on up at the top. And that's why I gave up my seat, because I don't want to be part of that. I think that it's possible to have truth in media. I see it happening even in mainstream. You'd be surprised, like Vice. Vice does an incredible job of putting out information about things that no one, literally no one ever talks about. But we don't pay attention to that because that's not part of truth media. That's not part of the alternative media. The alternative media has its own rock stars, like we were mentioning, Lindsey Graham and Gerald Celente and Paul Craig Roberts. And we just listen to all of these people. We don't think about where they came from. A lot of the people that are the celebrities in alternative media come from the Council for National Policy, who I think I've talked about it on your show, I've talked about it on other shows. This is a group of evangelical Christians who got together in the early 80s and have written the plot lines to almost everything you hear about in alternative media. And their showmen are now celebrities of alternative media. And so that just completely seems to escape every single person. It doesn't make any sense why the alternative media is so concerned with religion, and specifically Christianity, and specifically Christian rights. It doesn't make any sense why the alternative media is so enthralled with precious metals and purchasing precious metals, because this obviously helps out the bankers and the governments that we don't like, and yet we're going to give them our money. It just 2 years ago, in 2013, I wrote an article about a gentleman who was purchasing gold for delivery, and he noticed that his hedge fund, when he looked at his bank statements, they were skimming off the top. Well, when he did a little bit more research, and he actually got an attorney involved and filed a lawsuit in Manhattan Federal District Court, because he discovered how his bank, through his hedge fund, was making money every single day. In fact, he named 5 banks: HSBC, Credit Suisse, Bank of America, Citigroup, and JP Morgan Chase. And they all, every single day, twice a day, fix the price of gold in order to, just like at Starbucks, you just kind of skim the cream off the top of your coffee. They do the same thing with the price of gold as it's fluctuating. So why would we invest our money in something that's not only making the bankers and the international governments that we despise money, but they're getting even more money off of it just because of the fluctuating nature of the stock market and the ability to hide micro trades? None of this makes any sense. It's never made any sense to me, but it seems to be a big deal to the alternative media, which, after doing several years of research into these people and what's going on, this is an industry. It's a billion-dollar industry, by the way, and it's a money-making scheme. And yes, the mainstream media does lie. Yes, and there are people who work in mainstream media who have worked for the government. Wolf Blitzer used to work for the CIA, right? I mean, we know this. It's not even
No.
hidden. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. But you also have to understand, Rachel Maddow pays MSNBC X amount of thousands of dollars a month just to have her seat there. It's like something like 50 or $100,000 a month. She has to pay that. That comes out of her pocket. So she's got to find a way to make money. That's why she sells books. That's what uh, Bill O'Reilly is all about. Bill O'Reilly has made his fortune by selling books. That's why he's always writing a new book, because he has to pay Fox News to have that seat. Now he makes a lot of money off of that, and they're happy to up his contract. But if he's not making money for them, they're not going to. It was just in the news recently that Jimmy Fallon got his contract up for another 6 years. Why? Because the Tonight Show, the revenue for the Tonight Show and the viewership of the Tonight Show since Jimmy Fallon came on, whether you agree with it or not, has skyrocketed. So obviously he's a good sell. They're going to keep him in his seat. But if it were another way, they would tell him that he had to leave, regardless. And he still pays for his seat on the Tonight Show. So there's a lot of things about this that we just don't understand. But if we want to find this stuff out, and it's not hard to find this stuff out, and we want to put the entire puzzle together, what I've come to understand as the alternative media is a joke. It is a mouthpiece for the conservative Christian CNP. It is completely agenda driven for corporations, for oil corporations, for the NRA. It has nothing for Christianity in itself, that is apparently being persecuted, even though 70.6 of the 320 million people in the United States identify as either Protestant or Catholic. So I don't know where the war on Christianity is coming from.
Where did you get that statistic?
That was a Pew study that was done about 2 months ago. They do a study every 7 years on statistics on religion. And so what they found is it's dropped. Actually, it was when they did the study 7 years ago, it was 78% identify as Protestant and Catholic, but now it's jumped down to 70.6.
Wow. Now, I got to ask you, Suzanne, personally, as you know, I'm not a religious person. I'm probably anti-religious, but what are your spiritual beliefs? What do you, and I know we're kind of getting into the woo-woo factor here, but what do you think happens after death? What's your opinion?
I I do not believe anything happens. I believe we die and that's it. The brain shuts off. I'm an atheist, and that was very difficult. I actually had to come out of the closet, so to speak, about 9 months ago, because it became a huge issue. Is Susanna Christian? She shows up on all these shows. She talks about all this stuff. Is she a Christian? Because if she's not a Christian, then she works for the other side. And I decided that I wasn't going to be bullied by radio hosts. I wasn't going to be bullied by an audience. I don't care. I'm not speaking to you. If you are irrational and you can't think with logic and reasoning, and you have to have a security blanket in order to get through your day, I'm not for you. Don't even bother. I don't care. So I am an atheist. I I have not seen any evidence of anything. I would love for it to be true. My mother just passed away. I would love for it to be true. I've even sat in my room late at night and said, "Mom, if you can move something, appear to me, scare me if you have to." Nothing. There's been dead silence. She's been gone for a month now, and nothing. I have never seen any evidence to show that any claims of any spirituality at all, or anything that we consider spiritual, including ghosts and things like that, to have any factual basis in reality. But what I do see is the way that the brain hallucinates, the way that our mind works when we're close to death. Research even into Raymond Moody, who did the book Life After Death and did all that study about people who came back to life after dying. Well, here's an interesting fact. We still to this day, even in 2015, adhere to the same ideology and procedural protocol as we did in 1968 when it comes to brain death. We have not advanced our understanding of what brain death is since 1968. And there have been lots of cases where people who were deemed dead, and the coroner came in and they are on the autopsy table and they wake up. Just recently, I think it was less than a year ago, there was an infant in China who the parents were told was born as a stillborn. And one of the morgue attendants overnight came downstairs because he heard crying. And he opened up one of the drawers, and it was the infant crying in the drawer.
Wow.
I don't think we understand what happens. I don't think we understand our own body. I don't think we understand our mind. And I don't think that we, because we don't understand what happens, we're scared. Every one of us is terrified. This is something that we can't get out of. You can avert an accident when you're driving. You can, not go into an unsafe area of town and avoid getting shot and killed, right? Or mugged. You can
Hopefully,
break up, right?
unless you live in Detroit.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
or or in Ferguson and you're
Oh
African
yeah.
American. You can break up with your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, or wife before they go crazy and kill you. In most instances, you can sniff it out and you can stop this bad thing from happening. But none of us are getting out of it alive. We all have to die. And we don't know how that's going to happen. And some ways of dying are more painful than others. And that is a deep-rooted fear that we have. The other thing is that we've always been conscious, so it's hard for us to understand that we will not be conscious someday. And I kind of understand this because when my son was born, I actually had eclamptic seizures, thanks to my doctor, who didn't tell me I was pre-eclamptic.
Oh, did he
And
fill you with vaccines too?
uh, I don't know what I got in the hospital because I was unconscious for 2 days because of the seizures.
Oh my goodness.
But as I was going into the second seizure, and I didn't know what was happening, my head was turning. And the attendant in the ambulance, this was before we even left my residence. My husband was getting into our car to follow the ambulance, and they were just closing the doors. He said, "Suzanne, can you hear me?" And I said, "Yes, I can hear you." And he said, "Suzanne, you need to respond. Can you hear me?" And I said, "Yes, I can hear you." And then I realized my lips were not moving. And I thought to myself, "Oh no, I don't even know how to make my lips move because they've always moved. So how am I supposed to make my lips move?" And as I realized, I couldn't control any other part of my body, so I couldn't signal to him. I couldn't blink. I couldn't move my nose. I couldn't move my hands. I was going into the seizure. Now, as the seizure took over, everything started to become black and I had tunnel vision and poof, it's gone. And it's like the film skips. And all of a sudden I woke up and I went to sit up, and I'm in a hospital room, and my husband's sitting next to me, and he puts his arm across me and says, "Don't sit up." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because we this was the night this was the 2 days after my son was born, and I thought I was still pregnant, and I'd had a C-section, and you shouldn't really use your abdominal muscles right after you have that kind of operation. So for
Right.
me to sit up, I would have torn everything up." And my husband was like, "No, don't do that because, you're not pregnant anymore." I had no idea. And I also had no near-death experience. I had no tunnel of white light. Nobody came to see me, nothing. And I was dead. I was the doctors told my husband that he was either going home with me or our child, but they weren't sure which one. And so why is it selective? Why does this only happen for if it's true that that happens, then it happens for everyone. But what really happens is the pituitary gland releases DMT. And what really happens is when we have traumatic experiences in our life that we don't understand, we either completely forget them and blank out, or we create scenarios that may not actually be true. And I'll give you an example of this. I have a friend who I've known her, gosh, probably about close to 30 years, and she's adopted. And so when I first met her, she lived with her adopted parents and everything was fine. And as we grew up, she kept talking about her mother and her birth mother. And she kept saying things about like how she was in the room the night that her birth mother was murdered by her father. And that's why she was taken to an orphanage and adopted out. And I had no reason not to believe her. I mean, Annie was really popular at the time, and I wasn't really sure if maybe she saw the movie and she thought, make up some cool story and then, make her parents out to be like Daddy Warbucks to deal with it. I don't know, because I'm not adopted out. But years later, in fact, about 6 years ago, and I was with her when she met her birth mother. Her birth mother is not dead. She's very much alive. And there's an entire story that she was old enough to have recalled, but for some reason in her mind, it was too traumatic of an idea, a concept, that her mother would give her up for adoption. So she created this story where her mother was murdered because she couldn't accept the fact that her mother would give her up for adoption. The only way her mother would get rid of her is if she had to, and the only way a mother has to is if they're dead. They can't take care of the child. So she created this story to make it okay for her to go on with her life, which completely unraveled when she met her birth mother. And I went through this with her emotionally, and I was very lucky to have gone through this with her because it made us closer, but it made me realize how incredible our brain actually is. That she lived with this hallucination, this lie that she told herself that gave her comfort and gave her the ability to move on and be part of her adopted parents' life and move on with this new name and this new idea of who she is, and had nothing to do with her birth mother. But yet, when she met her birth mother, she realized she was a lot like her, even though her birth mother had never raised her. And it was eerie how alike she was. Even when they would sit down on the couch, they would both cross their legs the same way and reach for their coffee cup the same time to take a sip. It's amazing. They didn't know each other. She was adopted out at 2.5 years old. So our brain is incredible, but we don't understand how it works. And because we don't understand how it works, we're afraid of what's going to happen when we stop being conscious. And because it's forever, and because that's something you can't go back from, it's not like getting a divorce where you know that your ex is out there, and if some weird thing happened, you might get back together. Even if you don't want that to happen, weird things happen. Death is permanent, and that's it. It's over. And we have to find some way to justify that because death happens on all fronts, not just to the elderly, but to the young, even to the unborn. Stillborns, how do we explain that? Everything was going fine, and yet the body decided that it wasn't worth it. Miscarriages. How do we explain that? So we have to come up with these security blankets. And unfortunately, because of these security blankets that we've come up with, and I'm referring to them as, religion, because normally when I go on a show, I have to use like code. We, the people who have created those religions have realized that masses will take that fear and do whatever they can to stave it off as long as humanly possible. And if that means that they have to do some weird ritual every day, then they'll do it. If they have to believe some crazy thing that makes absolute no sense, and if somebody came up to them and told them that that was true, they would smack them in the face, they'll do it. They'll even, to the extent, commit violence against their fellow man in the name of it because we are afraid of dying and because we don't know what happens when we die. And because, for all intents and purposes, the honest truth is we can't accept the fact that when we die, that's it. There's got to be something else. But yet there isn't. And yet, but we got to have something else. But no, there isn't. It's over. It's over. I think it's too scary for us as a species, and we haven't grown past that yet. And unfortunately, because that is true, there are people, there are groups, there are, hundreds of thousands of people, and that's a conservative number, over long periods of time who have realized, hey, I can get people to do the most incredible things if I get them to believe this. I mean, the parents who gave their children Kool-Aid with cyanide in it in Jonestown, they really believed that they were doing the right thing for their child. I'm a mother. I could not do that. But I know that those parents were probably good people, probably people you would want to live next door to, probably really nice people who just believed something crazy. And I'm not of the same bent as you are. I don't know if it's okay that people can believe whatever they want, simply because look at what's happened. Over centuries, we've got mounds and mounds of evidence that some ideas are just bad ideas. And maybe as a species, we need to let go of those ideas. But that opens up a whole new can of worms because a lot of people have made money off of those ideas. Joel Osteen, he's going to have to sell his mansion.
Oh, he's made a ton of money. I was in Houston for a month working out there, and I was working right next to his church. And I would watch out the window people going to his his services, and people would be in line for an hour and a half in their car just to get to his church. I mean, the guy makes a ton of money, and hey, I think that's great. Good for you, Mr. Olstein. But I got to tell you, Suzanne, what you're talking about, it's very difficult for a lot of people to think to themselves, okay, after this, when I die, that's it. And personally, I am not a religious person at all. Like I told you earlier, I'm anti-religious, but I have had experiences before in my life where I've actually left my body as I was going to sleep. And I felt as if at that specific time, I was more than my physical body. Whether that was my pineal gland putting specific chemicals into my brain to believe that, I don't know. Was I on anything? No, I was going to sleep, and I was literally leaving my body, watching myself as I left my body. And at that point in time, I was a religious person, and it scared me to the point to where I woke myself up. And then as I went to sleep again, I left my body again, and I watched myself leave my body, and I could see the environment around me. And in my opinion, I do feel we are more than our physical consciousness. But that doesn't mean it's real. That's just my belief. And if that's a defense mechanism to make me feel better about myself going to sleep at night, thinking I will have infinite longevity, maybe that's the reason. I don't know. But I've got to say, I really appreciate your opinions and your belief and your ideology. Hopefully, for your sake and my sake and everybody else's, there is something more than the physical body. I do know that as far as scientific data, we only see about 0.01% of the electromagnetic light spectrum, which means we're not seeing everything that's out there. Our physical eyes only see a very finite point. And if you look at something underneath an electromagnetic electronic microscope, they can't find a finite point. Everything is energy. So are we in a holographic universe? Are we just succumb to a finite life that lasts 70 to 100 years? I don't know. Those are things beyond my belief. But hopefully there is something more than this physical existence, and this is just I guess you could say a comfortable, numb sense of reality. But that's a whole other subject. I know.
Well, I'm a big fan of Susskind, and I've read his holographic theory. And the wonderful thing about theories, and the misinterpretation of scientific data is the problem, but the wonderful thing about theories is that it opens up the door to better thinking. We have opened up through mathematics the concepts of gravity and of magnetic pull and understanding our world. Just understanding what the northern lights are with the magnetic poles, understanding how heliocentric universe opened us up to the study of the sun that we have now, and the weather. It's not weather like down here, obviously, because the vacuum of space, but the electromagnetic solar wind that comes through and how it affects our world, specifically because we use satellites now. And when we first put up satellites, we didn't know anything about that, and we didn't realize how fragile, especially since everything basically depends on satellite communication now.
Right.
I mean, we do have cables that go underneath oceans, but we depend a lot on satellite communication. So I'm waiting for the definite proof. I used to be, I've tried on every religion, mostly every religion. I've been to mosques. I've been baptized. I've been to shul, a temple, a Jewish temple. I've prayed with monks, with Buddhist monks, and I got the opportunity to pray with Tibetan monks when the Dalai Lama was in Seattle. That was amazing, and just being around that was just amazing. And it causes so many chemicals to go through your brain and such a sense of euphoria when you're involved in it. But as soon as I stopped believing in ghosts, I stopped seeing them. And I thought to myself, that's kind of funny, because if ghosts exist, whether or not I believe in it, I should still see them. But now that I don't believe them,
You used to see them?
oh yeah, when I was a teenager, oh yeah, I used to see ghosts all the time. In fact, my friends and I, we would go into, I lived in a rural area where there were lots of abandoned farm, and some of these homesteads were built in the 1920s and before, in the 1800s. And so we would go to like old graveyards and old abandoned farms, and we would see orbs, and we would take pictures, and we would scare the crap out of ourselves. We'd go sit in an old cemetery on a Friday or Saturday night in Coral Gables and wait for the ghost to come out and then scare ourselves and get in our cars and go home. But as soon as I stopped believing in that, the ghosts went away. The cemeteries were just cemeteries. The old abandoned houses and farms were just old abandoned houses and farms. So that to me is the crux of the issue. I I understand, like with the example I was using before with Stephen Colbert, his belief in his religion causes him to do these charitable things to make his life and the life for other people better. When he heard that the school district in North Carolina was or South Carolina was not going to support the teachers and they were going to have to buy materials for their students for this year out of their own pocket and they're already getting paid like $25,000 a year, they can't afford this. He went and paid out of his own pocket every single grant. Every single grant that was submitted to every teacher in South Carolina, all of their materials will be paid for. His religion causes him to do this. That's amazing. But he is an anomaly. He is not. The majority are the people who showed up at that rally with Kim Davis. People who support Ted Cruz, who says that we should get rid of all of our Supreme Court justices and replace them with conservative Christians so they can vote biblical values. Or people who read the 10th Amendment Center and believe that the U.S. Supreme Court has no right to make laws. They only have the right to voice their opinion on a law, even though it states in the Constitution that the U.S. Supreme Court not only has original jurisdiction, which means you can file a complaint in that court, but they also have appellate jurisdiction, which means they can change, alter, or even redecide on a case that was decided in a lower court or on the state level because it's on appeal. These facts seem to escape the 10th Amendment Center and Ted Cruz. But Ted Cruz is part of the CNP. And I can't verify that the 10th Amendment Center is, but they spew out CNP rhetoric all the time. And that rhetoric supports the Christian ideology that, hey, we don't like other religions, and we certainly don't like any Muslims. We want Christianity because this country was founded on Christian values. Can I take you on a short history lesson for a second?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, my son is homeschooled. And so as long as I
That's
adhere to,
awesome, by the way.
yes, and my 4-year-old daughter as well, she's homeschooled. So we were studying U.S. history, and we were studying a portion of it from PBS Digital Studios, PBS, Public Broadcasting System, right? And so this gentleman from Crash Course, his name is John Green, you can watch it on YouTube, and he was discussing where our country came from and the people who originally inhabited this country, not the Native Americans, but the Europeans who came over. Here's the interesting thing. Jamestown, Virginia, which was the first successful colony, and I say successful because the other two started and everybody starved to death and died. But this successful colony was only successful because it was created by the Virginia Company located in the UK. Okay, so a corporation sent over their employees to set up a colony and to dig for gold out of the Chesapeake Bay because the Spanish had gotten all of that gold from down south with the Aztec. And the Virginia Company thought, hey, there must be gold in them hills. We'll start in the Chesapeake Bay region. Well, they didn't find any gold. But what they did find is commerce. They were able to produce sugar and tobacco. And that was enough for the corporation to be able to get the okay from King George because he could tax the crap out of that because everybody likes drugs. So the Virginia Company created the first colony, expanded out their reach to several other colonies, including giving the sole proprietorship to a gentleman named Cecil in Maryland. What we know today as the state of Maryland was originally a sole proprietorship set up by the Virginia Company for this gentleman to run, and that was his job. The amount of people who came over for religious persecution, the Puritans and the Pilgrims, that was about 20 to 30,000 people who landed in what became the colony of Plymouth in Massachusetts. And that's it. The majority of the people, 95% of the people who originally colonized the 13 colonies, were all either executives and indentured servants of the Virginia Company and other companies subsequently after that, or they were boatloads of African slaves who were brought over because indentured servants became too expensive for the Virginia Company. Because if you survived your indentured servitude between 7 to 10 years, then you were given a portion of your earnings, quote unquote, that you had earned over that amount of time.
Didn't David Icke say that the majority of the U.S. is actually controlled by the Virginia Corporation?
The entirety of the 13 colonies originally were created by the Virginia Company, and there was one other company whose name escapes me. But those two companies set up all of the 13 colonies. Oh,
Wow.
it goes on and on. It's amazing. What we know to be true, this country was not founded on religious values or religious freedom or anything like that. It was founded on corporate values and greed. In fact, our American Revolution was not about freedom. It was about the right to smuggle in goods. That's the part nobody likes to talk about. The colonists were known for smuggling in goods. And the Boston Tea Party was an affront to smuggling goods because, see, the what the government of England first did in order to stop smuggling here in the United States, because they lost a lot of tax revenue because of it. So what they did is they lowered the tax on tea from 6 cents to 3 cents to try to deter smuggling because it was cheaper for people to buy and they wouldn't be able to support the smuggling industry. But that wasn't enough. So what they did is they started sending over the lower quality tea, like the Walmart version of Earl Grey over here, which made the smugglers extremely pissed off because when they went to go into their market and sell, they couldn't get the kind of value for this crappy Walmart kind of, low cost tea because nobody wanted to drink it. They know what Earl Grey tastes like, and this doesn't taste like it. So the original, like the Sons of Liberty, who started, organizing and getting people to protest, and the people who dressed up like Indians to go against the king and throw the tea in the harbor. Why were they, nobody ever questions why they were trying to implement the Indians in this, but no, this was for freedom. But what it really was and I'm not condoning the British government at all, but the British government was trying to make money off of taxes. And they didn't like the idea that the taxing was getting in the way of their smuggling operations. So the colonists who organized the rebellion because they wanted to continue smuggling, because they were making lots of money and they were able to afford lots of wealthy things like the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act is absolutely ridiculous as a turning point for our country, but yet it's taught, even in alternative circles, that that was a major point. The Stamp Act only applied to paper. And who has the ability to afford paper? Wealthy people, elite people, like judges and attorneys and bookkeepers, not the everyday person who was part of the demonstrations. Those people didn't have paper. The Stamp Act didn't apply to them. It applied to the wealthy. So what the wealthy elite did was, because they didn't have any standing and they didn't have enough numbers, they got the lower class people to get upset about it because they started raising money to cover the stamp. So not only were we manipulated by corporations and we were manipulated into thinking that we had something to do with religious freedom, but our country was fought over because elites didn't want to pay money that the government of England under King George was taxing them without representation. And yes, that part is absolutely true. But these people made a lot of money off of smuggling goods and selling them on the black market to people. And when they couldn't do that anymore, they rebelled. And so we had an American Revolution over that. Now, that for me throws everything up in the air. That toss all the coins up in the air. Because not only is it not what we're told it is, it's not even what we are alternatively told it is. This country was literally founded by corporate douchebags, and the corporate douchebags that came over here eventually made enough money that they felt like they were the head douchebag, and they decided to rile up the people on behalf of them. And in order to keep their illegal black market activity that was making them the majority of their money, they got a bunch of people to fight. It's amazing. The, And if you go back into history of other countries, I'm sure that you'll find this kind of convoluted mess over and over and over again. And I think this goes back to human nature.
Yeah, it's like the most twisted people that are willing to do anything. They're the ones that can end up taking control over countries.
Absolutely. Well, you've got a new world. You've got untapped resources. God only knows what you've got. The Spanish and the Italians were in the West before Lewis and Clark came over and supposedly discovered the West and started the revolution on westward. That's a complete lie, too. In fact, what we know as New York used to be New Amsterdam. And the only reason why we know it as New York is because the British soldiers didn't like the fact that New Amsterdam was being run by old Amsterdam, where women had rights, where people were not, even though they were slaves, they were not treated as badly as the Europeans treated their slaves, and the ability to survive your servitude and get something out of it was a lot greater in New Amsterdam than it was in Virginia, in Jamestown. So the British took over and forced the Amsterdam government to retreat and send their people back to their country. So now we know it as New York. It's just amazing to me. But again, we don't learn this in school, and we certainly don't learn this in alternative history. So how are we supposed to know what we're fighting for? How are we supposed to know what's important to us as a culture? How are we supposed to know where we came from and where we're going if at every turn it is manipulated and propagandized? Let's just call a spade a spade. There's no such thing as American exceptionalism. We're just as douchebaggery as everybody else. The only difference is we have had a foothold on the world for so long that we believe our own bullshit, if I could say that on your show.
Absolutely.
And that's all it is. It's just a perception, but it's not reality.
Well, reality is whatever you make it. And, we spoke with Douglas Dietrich yesterday on the Leak Project about the creation of America. And so many people think that the founders of America, like George Washington, etc., were such noble individuals. They never told a lie, etc. And there's a lot of information that contradicts that. And what you're talking about is mind-blowing to a lot of individuals. Let's get into the current elections. You've got Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton. What are your takes on Donald Trump?
Oh my gosh. Okay, first of all, if you want to talk about predictive movie making, just go watch Idiocracy.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone,
The
right
average
after the
IQ is
show,
about 75.
he reminds me of Macho Camacho. Okay? The president. But
I got a big gold chain around my neck. It looks good.
right. Look at me, my hair is real. No.
It's
He's a
Brill
he
cream.
he is the epitome. He is the poster boy of corporate douchebaggery. And we're always talking about, hey, Obama and George Bush and maybe even Jimmy Carter and who knows, maybe even Nixon. They were all puppets of the elite. No, so we're going to put one of their own, literally, not just figuratively, but literally into the executive chair, and we think things are going to be different? Really? This man hires immigrants to mow his lawn and do his dishes, and yet he wants to build a wall, even
Do you
though
have proof of that, Suzanne?
I do, and I will get it to you. I
Okay.
I will get you the source links. Yes, I will get you the source links. But he's talking about building a wall. Doesn't he know that statistically speaking, over 50% of the people who are immigrants in this country fly into our country? So what's that wall going to do? Never mind the fact that hey, I build buildings. So what are we going to do? Are we going to build a 95-foot, story tall,
50,000 feet tall.
yeah, and just knock it over onto its side and just go along the border? I mean, what are we going to do? Is it going to be like the Trump Palace all along there? Are we going to have like
But people are
fountains and
loving
doormen?
him right now. If you look at the alternative media, like a lot of these conspiracy forums that supposedly get hundreds of thousands of viewers a day, they're just boasting Trump and how amazing he is and how he's going to save the world.
Yeah, this man sold steaks. This man, Trump the game. Okay? That's all I got to say. Trump the game. This man bankrupted 5 corporations, and because of legalities that he swears he only abused the law those 4 times, right? Even though it was 5 bankruptcies. No, he only abused it 4 times. He said that on the debate. I know what the law is, and I used my lawyers, but I only did it a couple times, and here I am telling you this, so I'm a good guy. And what he did was he caused hundreds of thousands of people to lose their jobs, income that they were depending on, and he walks away because it's the corporation that gets hurt, not him. And he walks away with billions of dollars. If he does that to his businesses, what is he going to do to this country? Not to mention, I mean, I know I'm attacking aesthetics, but come on.
Conspiracy theorist.
I know. There's a conspiracy. I'm with Bill Maher on this one. There's only 2 animals in this world that has that color hair. The orange-haired orangutan and him.
Have you seen a picture of him from 20 years ago?
I
I
know you
remember it
mentioned.
very well. I used to see him on TV all the time 20, 25 years ago, and he did not have that full head of hair. Is that a wig? No. That's his real hair, but where did it come from?
It came from the back. And what he does is he swirls it on top and he sprays. I know we
Oh,
don't use
wow.
Aquanet anymore, but it's been that long since I used hairspray, and he just
Spray
swirls it
hair.
around. He probably goes into a room, a special room, and wears a gas mask and sprays that thing. With someone with his amount of money, he says he's worth $10 billion, right? And he can't afford a good hairstylist. Come on, he's not fooling anyone. And I feel bad for his wife who has to wake up and see what it actually looks like before he swirls it back up.
So, have you heard of the Skull and Bones?
Yes,
Do you think he's affiliated with them?
no. But what's interesting is his father in the 1920s was arrested during a KKK brawl where the police officers arrested a bunch of protesters. And I'll give you a little hint, his father did not work for the police force in New York at the time. And New York Times reported on this. And then Raw Story dug it up and reported on it. And we know that it was his father because at the time in the 1920s, they gave the address of Fred Trump. And it was the address that Fred Trump lived in at that time. So should we visit the sins of the father onto the son? Maybe not. But I'm pretty sure that living in an affluent community under a wealthy father who was part of the KKK, that might have had some influence on his ideas today about, I don't know, immigrants.
And a lot of people think that Donald Trump might be the next Ross Perot. This person that comes out of nowhere. He's got all sorts of money and he's able to spin any situation. Do you think that he might be the next Ross Perot?
He could be. I absolutely think he could be. But you know what? And this isn't reported enough in alternative media. The polls are for Bernie Sanders, not Hillary Clinton. In fact, 57% of even women who were polled, but in majority, it was 42% women, but 50% of the people who were polled, male and female, do not trust Hillary Clinton. They use words like evil and mean and bitch and untrustworthy and liar. I don't think she's going to be president. Bernie Sanders might take her lead because he's got a huge following, and they're kind of doing that thing they did with Ron Paul with they're not covering it as much as they could, but the amount of people who show up at a Bernie Sanders event is mind-blowing considering the little amount of press that he gets. I think that Hillary Clinton and the Clinton family is just a staple of the alternative media storyline. And so everybody's always talking about Hillary. But if we're going to talk about a fight between the Democrats and the Republicans, I think we should pay more attention to Bernie Sanders. And obviously, yes, we should pay attention to Donald Trump because, like it or not, believe it or not, if he keeps going this way, the RNC is going to have to make him the nominee for president, whether they like it or not, because it looks like he would be the only one who had a chance at winning. And if he does, that's pretty scary. He wants to put corporate CEOs into his cabinet. So again, we've been talking about the theoretical running of our country by corporate douchebags through lobbyists and putting their people like Michael Thomas into the FDA. Now we're talking about not just a man sitting in the executive chair, but his entire presidential cabinet. We're talking about the heads of all of these agencies and bureaucracies that we love and hate so much, like the DHS and the Department of Health and Human Services and the DOJ. The heads of all of these bureaucracies meet. That's his cabinet. That's the president's cabinet. He meets with these people on a regular basis. If they are all corporate douchebags from companies now running the bureaucracies of our government,
And
and then on top of it, we have a corporate douchebag in the executive chair, we're in a lot of trouble.
and didn't Obama do the same thing?
Obama did, but in small doses. And presidents before him have done it, but in small doses. Now what we're talking about is the entire corporatization, literal corporatization of our country, not just in figurative language, but in literal language. Like uh, Christie. Chris Christie was just talking to his constituents at a town hall meeting about a week ago. And he was talking about how he wanted to take Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx, and give him over to ICE so that they could use tracking procedures like they do with packages for people who have visas. And oh, wouldn't that be a great idea?
Hey, what's
Well,
your thoughts on Chris, by the way?
well, here's my thoughts. I thought to myself when I watched him talking about this, I said, wait a minute, that sounds like a sales pitch. That sounds a lot like NLP. Let me go look at this. Well, it just so happens that Fred Smith has donated a lot of money to Chris Christie. And Fred Smith's daughter, who also works for public relations at Google, has graciously agreed to be a major member of the public relations for Chris Christie's presidential campaign. So,
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And then, Donald the other day, he was talking about, I'm never going to eat Oreos again. I'm never going to, everywhere he went, he kept saying Oreos, Nabisco, Oreos, Nabisco, Oreos, Nabisco. Yeah, because Nabisco has donated to his campaign. And so whether he tells you he hates Oreos or not, you're still going to buy them because Donald Trump was talking about them. And so these people are not just campaigning for your votes, they're actually fitting in commercials through native advertising into their presidential speeches for nomination. Uh, It, it, it's in plain sight, folks. It really is. That part about it is true. But I just don't think we're paying attention. I don't think we're looking at what's happening in front of us because we're so busy talking about the Clinton body count, who, by the way, the guy who created the Clinton body count, member of the Council for National Policy. So there you go. We're always talking about all the evils of this company and that company, and we're not paying attention to the fact that, at least I know that when President Clinton ran, he was the first president to use Gallup polls and survey polls to be able to talk to his constituents. And that's why he knew exactly what to say no matter where he was going in the country. And everyone felt like he was talking directly to them. And since he started that, politicians have been using that tactic ever since. And Obama was really good at using that tactic. He was very charismatic. It felt like he was talking to all of us. He was like a blank slate where we could all put our ideas of what someone could be. And he took that information and
you
ran
are
with it.
under my spell.
Exactly. But what Donald Trump is doing and what Chris Christie is doing and even Rand Paul and Senator Ted Cruz, they're actually marketing. It's not just waiting for when they become president and then doing the bidding of the people who donated to them, but they're actually advertising for their the people who are donating to them while they're speaking to you about why you should vote for them for president. Let's go back to Ted Cruz for a minute. Ted Cruz recently amassed $38 million for his presidential campaign. It's a lot of money.
Wow.
2 million came from everyday constituents, just like you and I would, right? Donating. The $36 million came from 4 people. Well, actually, 3 people, because 2 of them are brothers. The 2 brothers belong to the Assembly of Yahweh, which is a crazy Christian cult.
The Assembly of Yahweh?
Yeah, you got to look these
Wow.
guys up.
No. Wow.
They believe that the Bible should be taken literally and that all of our laws should be followed specifically through literal interpretation of the Bible, which is the problem,
Wow.
ironically, that we have in countries like Iran and Syria, where they have a theocracy and they have Shia ruling instead of Sunni ruling, because Shia literally take the Quran and interpret it and build their laws and their governments backed by everything that it says. So that's Sharia here in the
You,
United
you
States.
know what's scary, Suzanne? And I just want to interject real quick. If you bring that up to most Americans that go to church, or even if they don't go to church, they're Christians. And I think that, most Christians are amazing people. But if you bring that up, what they're going to say is, oh, well, have you read the New Testament? Because Jesus says that all of that is void now because he died for those sins. That's the scary factor.
Oh, yeah, but let's talk about how Jesus told slaves that they should remain in their servitude and be gracious for their servitude and
Be a
serve their masters
slave.
well. Or what about Romans 13, 1 and 2, where God created government and all of the people who run it, so you got to do what they say
Just
because
do
they
what
were
they
appointed by
say.
God. Hmm. Oh, yeah, the Bible's filled with lots of stuff. I love how they cherry pick because I've read the Bible. In fact, when I go and
I've
look
read it a
at
dozen times.
and the other versions of it and comparing and even in its original context in Hebrew and Aramaic in the
Have
Old
you been able
Testament.
to find the original context? Because most likely it's been retranslated several times.
Yes, all you have to do, you can pick up any version from the King James to the NIV. It doesn't matter and you get a dictionary of Koine Greek for the New Testament, which it was majority written, and some Aramaic and a little bit of Hebrew. And then you go to the Old Testament and you get a dictionary of Aramaic and Hebrew, and you take the word word for word and go back into the dictionary and see what the original word was and what the original meaning was. And then you write it down. Now, I realize this is very time consuming.
Well, no, no, let's just go a step ahead of that. If you look at the dictionary that you're reading now, the translation of that dictionary and the people that own the translation of that dictionary, the Rockefellers actually, there's no, you can't get to the specific definition that was written 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. It's been retranslated so many times that even in the dictionary, you're not going to get the real information.
Yeah, but you're talking about like Webster's dictionary and
Or the Encyclopedia Britannica.
right, but I'm talking about a dictionary. If you were going to go to France and you would purchase an English to French dictionary. And so you would literally understand what the literal interpretation of what you're saying is in French, not in France, so that you wouldn't say the wrong thing. You know, you
Right.
don't want to call them, a shithead, but if you get a dictionary of Aramaic and Koine Greek and Hebrew, which are available, and you don't have to go through any branches of Rockefeller. We're not talking about Webster's dictionary or the Encyclopedia Britannica, and you can actually sit down. I realize it's time consuming, but you know where I got this idea? When I did my little stint as a Baptist Christian, I was lucky. The pastor believed in literal interpretations because he knew that all of the translations of the Bible at some point were compromised, and some of them were created specifically to compromise, like the King James Version. So he made all of us go out and buy dictionaries, and we would literally translate each line word for word. And so I got to understand how the different interpretations and the translations of the Bible are messed up with. And if you know what the real word is and you know what its literal meaning is, then it's a completely different meaning. And you can't misinterpret that because you're looking at the language in which it was written in. And I'm sure lots of people listening have studied different religions and maybe speak multiple languages rather, and speak multiple languages and have studied them. And the interesting thing is, you can say something. I speak English, Spanish, and French. I can say something in French, a saying in French that makes no sense in English. In English, we say that it's raining cats and dogs. In France, they say it's raining umbrellas and boots. That doesn't make any sense to me. Umbrellas and boots, but you use an umbrella to stop the rain. I don't understand that. Well, they look at me and say, cats and dogs? There's no cats and dogs falling from the sky. What does that mean? There's lots of different idioms that we have in languages that we understand because we speak that language. And because it's our first language, our brain understands that to be that's normal. That's how we speak. That's what we do. But when you translate that to another language, you start to get confused. Why would that phrase be that? It doesn't make any sense. But yours doesn't make any sense. But you're used to it, so it makes sense to you. So when we're looking at old text, especially languages that are no longer spoken, like Koine Greek, we have to go to a literal interpretation. The only way to do that is to get a dictionary and literally word for word look at it and rewrite based on the definition of that actual word what was meant to be written there instead of what we see today. I think, and I know that that's time consuming. I know I spent a year at this Baptist church. It was the coolest thing in the world, though, because I learned so much about the New Testament and the Old Testament, about what they actually meant and how things have been changed to set agendas. And we were talking about this earlier. The Bible itself, the canon of Scripture, was all decided at the Council of Nicaea. And I know that we all know this, but do we really understand the implications of that? Do we really understand that the story of Lilith was exited out of the Bible in Genesis because Lilith was made of dirt and she was Adam's equal? But Eve was made of the rib of Adam and she was his dominion. And throughout Scripture, we see dominion over women. Well, it doesn't make any sense if the woman is made equal of Adam. That's why you got to get rid of Lilith. You got to demonize her and make her into a succubus, and you create Eve.
Have
There's
you
lots.
have you seen the TV series Last Man on Earth?
No.
Okay, well, I just got to interject some comedy here because for anybody that's seen that series, The Last Man on Earth, it's a comedy. You can watch it on Hulu. I ended up binge watching it on Hulu, and there's there's an episode in this series where basically what comes down to it is almost everybody on the earth gets destroyed, gets killed, whatever. There's this one guy that's looking for people. He can't find anybody. he's writing on all these signs. Okay, I'm here in Tucson. So he goes to Tucson. That's his hometown. He's the only one in the world that he knows of. And all of a sudden, people start showing up to Tucson. Well, he's trying to get some game, and he all of a sudden this gal shows up, and he's like, "Yeah, this is great. There's somebody else," and she's kind of ugly. She's kind of homely. He's not really into her, and then all of a sudden, this gorgeous blonde shows up from out of nowhere. He hasn't seen anybody in about 6 months, and so. But he ended up making a mistake. He was so horny that he ended up marrying this homely gal because he wanted to get some action, and the only way she was going to give it to him is if he married her. So they ended up getting married. This fake marriage, whatever. And this gorgeous blonde model type gal shows up, and he wants to have sex with this blonde chick. So he tells the homely gal, he says, "Well, if we're going to have kids, and if we're the only ones left in the world, I don't want our babies to have sex with each other. So let me have sex with this blonde chick." And so he's trying to convince, the gal that he just married to let him have sex with this other gal so that their babies aren't having sex, with each other when they get old enough to do it. And she's like, yeah, you're right. And if you read the Bible, well, the King James version of the Bible, you've got Adam and Eve, and then you've got Cain and Abel, and then all of a sudden, there's 7 billion people on the planet. So
Right.
what happened?
Where did their wives come from? And
Yeah,
who inhabited Canaan that they had to fight to get the land of milk and honey?
right.
I don't, again, I don't think those dudes thought this all the way through. And they were banking on the fact that their followers wouldn't think it all the way through. And they don't.
But it
They
worked for a long time.
It still works.
It does.
It doesn't make any sense. When I started asking questions about the devil and ghosts and things like that at the church, that's when everyone started shunning me, and eventually I ended up leaving the church and the religion altogether because you couldn't ask any questions. Everything was just Satan. Satan, Satan, Satan. But nope, Satan. But no, Satan. But no. I have to believe that an omniscient God who knows everything would create an adversary that he can't battle, but he's got to battle, and he's got to do this battle to save humanity that he created in the first place, and he knows how it's going to end, so he could have just made it so that it ended the way that, or started the way that it should have ended. And oh, yeah, let's talk about Satan for a second. Satan. Nobody really knows what a Satan is. Oh, it's interesting. In Hebrew, Satan is an adversary or an accuser, which would make sense because in Job, he is the prosecutor, right? That's exactly what a Satan would do. But over time, when you go through the Bible, the Satan shifts to a pronoun instead of just like calling someone Mr. or Mrs., a title. And when it moves from a title to a pronoun, that's when Satan starts to get all of this weird imagery, and he starts to, get built up, and he's got these washboard abs and these great wings and all of this cool stuff and all these magical powers that he can, have dominion and fight against God, and God can't do anything about it. He's just got to let people have free will. Really? Uh, I don't know anyone, and I'm pretty sure anyone listening would agree with me. And if you don't, it's okay. But when you build something, like my husband and my son, they just built a robotic arm. My son loves robots, and he wanted to actually build one. So we bought this robotic arm. He had to literally put it together. My husband was with him. He had to use, some sharp objects. So my husband was there with him, and he had to solder a couple of things. So he was very well supervised, but he actually had to build it. And he went through all of this stuff to build it. And when he built it wrong. And so he had to take half of it apart and put it together right and then get it. And then it broke. And so he had to fix it. He went through a lot of work to get that robotic arm just right. I can't imagine that a creator of the universe would be so haphazard to create such a situation that he has and such a predicament that he would need an adversary. What's interesting is Satan as a pronoun appears in the Bible when people start wondering why an omnipresent, omniscient God needs to fight against an adversary and have a battle of the wills. Because people couldn't imagine that the same God who saves this baby lets this baby die. And they couldn't wrap their minds around monotheism because before they had polytheism. the idea of multiple gods. And so you had you had Demeter, but you had Hades, and you had Persephone, right? And so Demeter gets all upset, and that's why we have winter. And Persephone was just running around in the forest one day, or the field, and Hades saw her and kidnapped her and said, "You have to be my wife." And she's, "I really like it down here, but I miss my mom." So she goes back up, and that's why we have spring. See, that stories make sense because there's a good guy, there's a bad guy, there's a victim, there's a compromise. We can understand that. And it fits with what we're seeing outside in the world, so we could kind of grasp that idea. I understand why people believe that for so long. But with monotheism, you have to accept that the God that does everything good also does everything bad. And people couldn't accept that because they had lived in a world where the bad guy was a separate entity. And so good and evil were not coming from the same venture. They were separate and they had to battle it out. And sometimes one of them lost. And so that just was the roll of the dice. Sometimes the good guy won, sometimes the good guy lost. But with monotheism, the good guy and the bad guy are the same guy. Now we have Satan. We have no longer a Satan, but now we have Satan with the capital S, and now we can go forward. Even though God is still omniscient and God is still all powerful and all knowing, and He created the beginning and the middle of the end. He's the Omega, and He's the Alpha and the Omega, and yet still people believe, yeah, but Satan. But if Satan were created by God, then he would be just as subject to God as everything else. That means God is not only the man upstairs that we want to sit and cuddle with in his lap, but he's also a psychopathic murderer who enjoys killing people in the most incredibly inhumane and destructive ways.
Like the dualistic. I had the opportunity to speak with a gentleman by the name of Douglas Dietrich, and he's a whistleblower that was in the military for a short while, but he also worked under individuals that claim to be high priests in the Church of Set. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you've heard of the individual by the name of Michael Aquino.
Yes.
Okay, he worked underneath him, and Michael Aquino has a lot of influence in the world and the military, etc. He's the founder of the Church of Set, which is basically a derivative of the Church of Satan by Anton LaVey. And if you get into a lot of the Hollywood media and actors and movie stars that claim to have sold their souls for fame to Satan, there's some very peculiar ideals. And Mr. Dietrich talked about how in the military there's certain sects of that literally, I mean, they do these crazy satanic rituals, ripping out the brains of their victims and eating them. And he claims that there's, video footage and photographs to back this up. And I don't doubt it in some sense, but there's so many faucets of reality. You've got people that are very honorable and have morals and values and treat their family well, etc., and others. And then you've got, individuals that do these crazy things. But as you say, it's there's so many different spectrums of reality and so many bad things happen. What do you feel is going to happen after physical reality if you are a bad individual? Do you think that you just go into blackness and there's nothing left, or I know you said you're an atheist, but some atheists feel that even after this physical reality, there might be something else after.
No, I don't think there's anything after. I think that we are made up of the neural net, and the neural net is a catalog of experiences, and that makes up who we are. And how we interpret those experiences create chemical reactions that we carry throughout our adulthood, and it's usually instilled in childhood. And who we are is based on what we experienced and how we took that in and how we use that information in the future. When I was young, Adam Walsh was taken from a Sears in Coral Gables, which
Right.
was about an hour away from where I lived. And about 2 months after he was taken, I got lost in a Sears, and my mother went completely nuts. It ended up that I went to the security officer, and he brought me back to my mom, and everything was fine. But that fear of Adam Walsh being taken, and of course, what happened to that poor child, and we don't really know everything that happened to him, unfortunately. But just the fear that that could be a possibility was enough to scare my mother to thinking, oh my God, my daughter's going to end up like Adam Walsh, even though there was nothing to say that that was true or that that would even be possible. But because that had been entered into her mind through the media coverage, that was now a possibility. Another case in point is just recently in Yahara Elementary in Wisconsin, an 8-year-old from the cafeteria pranked the police and said there was a gunman. And so the police showed up in SWAT team gear and scared the hell out of everyone and put guns in people's faces. And the superintendent of the school said, this is a great educational tool because now we
Wow.
know how to react. No, they just created PSTD in all of the teachers and all of
Big
the
time.
students. Yeah, because every time that door opens, now everyone in that classroom is going to go because they don't know if a gunman's coming through.
NLP.
Right. So conditioning happens over time, and we are the culmination of that conditioning over time. We do what we do because we were taught to do that because it affected us as children. Some people who come from broken families, I have a lot of friends who grew up in the 80s with me when all of our parents were getting divorced. And a lot of them have chosen not to get married. They've chosen to be in relationships for long periods of time and be committed, but they will not get married because of that stigma, because of their experience with their parents and how horrible it was and how detrimental it was to them as children when their family unit exploded, that they've decided they're just not going to participate in that anymore. And I think that carries out throughout our life. And the culmination of that is who we are. But that is simply just a chemical cocktail in our brain and a positronic, or not positronic, a neural net that is biological and that catalogs information and uses that information in situations as we grow up so that we're able to live long enough to procreate and then die. And I think that when our brain dies, that's when we die. Because what's
Have you heard
interesting
of
to,
remote viewing?
yes,
Have you ever heard of somebody by the name of Dick Algier, Daz Smith, or Courtney Brown?
Courtney Brown.
Okay. The only reason I'm asking this is Courtney Brown is the founder of the Farsight Institute, and Dick Algier and Daz Smith are a couple of remote viewers underneath him that are supposedly some of the best in the world. And they do these experiments where they'll be given a target, and Courtney Brown will say, okay, I want you to pick up 12C. And Daz Smith will pull up a whiteboard. He'll say, okay, 12C. He'll write it down on the whiteboard, and he'll visualize this target that he's supposed to pick up. He'll start drawing it on the whiteboard, and then you'll have Dick Algier or Daz, both of them, Dick and Daz, will do the same thing. They're on completely different sides of the world. They have no contact with each other, and they're going up, and whatever the target they're given is, they don't know what it is. They're just given a number or a letter or a combination of both, and they'll write it up on the whiteboard. And both of them will come up with virtually the same thing, not knowing what it is that they're given. They claim that they're able to do these specific tactics that the military has perfected or worked on since the 40s or 50s because of the Cold War. The Soviet Union started using these tactics, so did America, and they're able to do espionage via mind. But it's not telekinesis. It's not woo-woo. It's actual physiological proof of the mind over matter. So they'll pick up these targets, they'll come up with the same objects, and you'll have them recorded live. If you have the opportunity to check them out on the farsight.org, you can pick up the videos. They're very inexpensive. You can even get them for free on YouTube. But if you watch the actual data where they're being photographed, if they're not some of the best movie stars or actors in the world, like literally it seems legit, and they're drawing these subjects and these things that they're completely correlating with. So they're doing the same things. They don't know what they're drawing, and they're picking up by a mind, and they're claiming it's because this physical existence that we live in is really only a small portion of the spectrum of reality. It's more like a holographic matrix type per se, and we're a lot more than this specifically. What would you say for how are they able to do that if it's not more than what they say it is?
Well, first of all, I'd like to see the totality of their work because it's very easy for people to put out information when the uh, the study or the experiment goes the way that people thought it would. And we see that all the time. Corporations always put their best foot forward. But I would like to see the totality of their work and see what statistically, over chance, how often they accurately predict or are able to remotely view what they're claiming over what they're claiming. Secondly, I have to defer to Uri Geller. Uri Geller was the spoon bender in the 70s, and he could manipulate objects, and he supposedly knew what people were thinking and was able to predict things. But Uri Geller showed up on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and his props that he normally brings onto the show, or any show, were replaced by props that were given to him by The Tonight Show themselves. And so he hadn't worked any of this stuff. It was all brand new to him. And lo and behold, after about 30 minutes of squirming around in his seat, and they even took a break, when they came back to television, he decided that he couldn't work tonight. He wasn't feeling up to it. His the energies weren't right, and he felt that he couldn't work. He couldn't do his magic, so it would have to be another time. Von Prague and John Edwards and Shirley MacLaine and Jean Dixon and Sylvia Brown, who just passed away. Sylvia Brown incorrectly told a parent, two parents, that their children had been killed when their children had been kidnapped, and then their children resurfaced. One of the parents, their son, came back to them, I think, within weeks, and after they went on the Montel Williams show, and Sylvia Brown told them that their son had died. So,
Wow.
unfortunately, we love to, again, we want to think that something's true, and there is some incredible science out there about different things, like what kind of energies we exude. We know that when we look at our body through other spectrums, that we are emitting heat. But is that an aura? I don't know. It doesn't seem to fit the classical definition or the New Age definition of what an aura is. And yet people say, oh, that's proof of an aura. No, it's proof that our body emits heat. My mother, like I mentioned, my mother just passed away, and my mother's body was cremated. So there's no body. Her energy was expelled. Does that mean that her energy is floating around somewhere? No. When when we understand that we are all energy, you were talking about string theory, and you were talking about it at the lowest molecular level, even beyond the molecular level, we are just vibrating strings. So we take that truth and we spin it into somehow that fits into a spiritual belief because of confirmation bias. And we look at that and we see whatever we believe, whether we are Muslim or spiritual or Catholic or Protestant or whatever. And we try to fit that scientific data in somehow into our spiritual belief and use that scientific data in order to justify our belief system. But all it means is that there is something else happening, but we don't know what it is. And to attach some spirituality to it, to attach that kind of, ghostly apparition to it, degrades the advancement of it. If those people are actually able to successfully, over chance, be able to remotely view, that is fantastic. They should be studied. Because what if what they're doing is a normal state? What if what they're doing is because of some abnormal thing that happened to them? Maybe they were exposed to some sort of chemical. Maybe their brain is folded differently. Did you know that all of our brains are folded individually in our craniums, and no two brains are folded the same way?
Oh yeah.
It's amazing. And yet they function pretty much in the same vein, but yet we're all individually wrapped. So maybe they were exposed to something that allows some other part of their brain that is untapped. But then again, there's that lie that we only use 10% of our brain. That's not true. You use 100% of your brain. If you only use 10% of your brain, you'd be a vegetable on life support. So I think that as we learn about things in scientific circles and using the scientific method to study it, and the scientific method is simply just a deduction of hypothesis and trying to dispel your hypothesis and doing everything possible to disprove your hypothesis. And if you cannot, then it must have some semblance of accuracy, but only to the extent of your ability to perceive that accuracy and the technology's ability to interpret the accuracy, because someone could come along 10 years from now and take your hypothesis and your findings and totally blow it out of the water, or build upon it and create something else out of it, or totally dismiss it and put it out as junk science. We're limited only in, number one, our ability to perceive, which has to do with our belief structure. If we adhere to some sort of idea system, then we are bound by those constraints of that idea system. And we may think that we're like an open-minded person, but at the end of the day, an open-minded person is not going to kneel down by their bed and pray, because there's no one to pray to.
Well,
You get Something good happens to you, something bad happens to you. It happens throughout your entire life. Is it because you're a bad person? No. Is it because you made a bad choice? Probably. Is it because God willed it? No. Is it because that's life? Yeah.
Well, and then you look at people like Gary Kurzweil. I have had the opportunity to speak with people that are heavily involved in the transhuman movement, where they want to create a human that lives, infinitively or tens of thousands of years by manipulating the DNA. For someone that feels this life is it, and after this, you're nothing except for dust in the wind, per se, do you feel that people like Gary Kurzweil and others are on the right track, or do you know much about them?
Oh, no, I've followed Kurzweil for a long time, and I'm envious that you've been able to speak to him. I would love to speak to him, but I think that that's absolutely batty. I understand that people are afraid of dying, and I understand that we're getting close to creating a positronic neural net, and we are close to
What's a
building
positronic neural net?
just like Data had in Next Generation Star Trek. It is a mechanical brain. In fact, right now, DeepMind is working on it, and they are funded by Ashton Kutcher, Elon Musk, and Zuckerberg from Facebook. And so they are working on a robot brain that functions just like a human brain. Now, we're nowhere near any of that. And I have to stress that to people because we get
But
this,
how do we know that?
well, we know that because about 3 months ago, the very first robot showed sign of sentience. The very, very first robot, and it's one of these little toy robots in Japan. The scientist gave it a program, all three of them, and told I'm sorry, let me start over. The scientist imbued the three robots with the artificial intelligence program and then told the robots that they were given a pill that would cause them to not be able to speak, to not be able to move. And what happened was two of the robots sat there and didn't move. And one robot stood up and said, I have not been given the pill. And I know this because I am talking to you. Wow. That robot understood that it was not given the pill, even though there's no pill. It's proverbial, but it understood that it was different than the other two robots in that it could still speak and move, even though the other two, he just pressed a button on the top of their head and made them mute and unable to move. So this robot was able to sit up and then stand up, and it saw that the other two weren't. That is the very, very first robot that has ever displayed sentience, and that is just a tip. That is just a drop in the bucket for anyone that's had a kid. I don't know if you have children, but I have two, and they are amazing at how they become aware of their surroundings over the course of the first 2 to 2.5 years of their life. How they're able to become aware of themselves. How right now my daughter is 4.5 years old, and she dresses herself now. And what's ironic is she's conscious of the fact that her shirt and her pants or her skirt will not match. And she'll put an outfit she coordinates herself at 4.5 years old. It's amazing to me that she's conscious of herself to the extent that she doesn't want to look ridiculous in her clothes.
I can't even do
When,
that now.
yeah, exactly. I have trouble doing it. I walk out of the house, my husband's like, you're going to go outside looking like that? I'm like, I thought it looked good. I don't know. But she, at 4.5 years old, is worried about what other people think to the extent that she wants to put her best foot forward. And still, as she grows up, that idea is going to change and morph by society, by how I react to what she's wearing when she's 14 and she shouldn't be wearing that midriff top, by how her friends react to her potential boyfriends in the future, which I hope she never has. And all of these things are going to affect how she feels about herself. But this robot just barely scratched the surface of self-awareness. And that's a long stretch from Terminator movies, a really big, long, gigantic 1,000-year road that just began with the first step.
Well, let's talk about the Terminator series. Have you heard of the Skynet satellite system?
Yes, I think that's a really bad joke for a corporation to do that.
Well, it's been around since the late 50s. So you've got these Skynet programs that have been around since the late 50s, and then the Hollywood media comes out with Skynet and how it takes over the human race basically by annihilating the entire planet except for robots. It just seems quite interesting that they take that information from what is actually in existence and put it into the movies and try and spin the whole program.
Because a movie about a happy robot does not sell. Because Bicentennial Man, as successful as it was nowhere near as successful as even Robbie the Robot from Lost in Space or the Terminator franchise. Because we are afraid of things that are similar to us and yet different. That's why we think that there are different races. Sorry, black people are humans, just like white people. The Hispanic, we're all humans. There's no race but the human race. But when we see differences, especially when they look so much like us, it really creeps us out. And we can't understand, it's difficult for us to understand how our children develop. We create this biological body inside of our own, or at least I did, and there they are, independent and moving around, and they have their own thoughts and feelings. And as they grow up, the independence becomes even more and more acute. And the control and influence over how I perceive the world and how I want them to perceive the world is shattered with every year that goes on. And it's very difficult for me to lose control over my child while at the same time fostering independence, which is kind of like where I am with my 8-year-old. I want him to do what he wants to do, but I'm standing there watching him in the backyard going, he's into parkour and he's trying to like flip himself. And I'm like, make sure it's a hairline fracture. Oh God. But I got to let him do this because that's what he wants to do. It's the same thing with robots. We have the ability to build them. We want them to be part of our life because we love convenience and we want our lives to be easier. But we're interested in creating them for the purpose of being integrated into our existence. And so because of that, we have to create them in ways that will be acceptable to us. And the most acceptable way is to create them like us, like looking like humans. And it is freaking a lot of people out because they've been watching these Terminator movies and they've been watching all of these movies with the robots going out and killing people and the moral issues in iRobot and everything like that. And we've had this idea that sells lots of movies and lots of books because of our fear. But we don't entertain the idea that, like in Japan has that bottlenecking problem that I was talking about earlier. They have too many people retiring and not enough people entering the workforce. They have to build robots to fill in the gaps for a lot of service jobs that they just don't have enough people to fill. And they are in the process of doing that. And they are in the process of implementing that. And so when we see things in the news about like this one hotel that's run by robots, and you go and the concierge is this robotic looking woman, and one of them is a raptor, by the way. It's really friggin' cool.
A raptor
A raptor.
robot?
Yeah, you go and you check in and it's a raptor robot. You can choose from the nice woman and this man or something, and then this raptor. So it's really cool. But beyond that, I think that that idea is so far into the future, it's not even worth worrying about. However, if we are going to worry about the robots and the robots taking over, if we're going to listen to Stephen Hawking and we're going to listen to Elon Musk, let's take a look at the DARPA challenge in 2005 this past summer. These robots could not walk up 2 steps on a flight of stairs. They were constantly falling over. If they broke out into a run, they were tipping over.
Not
They,
the eater.
yeah,
The
yeah,
eater? The
the
EATR that's able to eat organic matter to continue to live? That thing's like a mule.
Oh, I'm talking about like Atlas and some of these other robots that have like 3 legs instead of two because and they're falling off. They're trying to open doors and they're turning the knob 6 inches to the left of where the knob actually is. We're nowhere near Terminator at all. It's not even in our scope of things. But the strange thing about technology is it doubles and it quadruples and it goes faster and faster as we go. I mean, just look at what's going on today. When I was a kid, a phone was a thing that was in the kitchen with this long cord that you always got yourself wrapped up in because you were
Right.
talking to your boyfriend or girlfriend all night, and then your mother would pick up the extension and start dialing and say, "Get off the phone,"
Right.
You can't do that now. In fact, what's kind of funny? I use my cell phone so much that I went to go make a phone call on my landline and I couldn't work it. I couldn't get it to dial because you don't have to wait for a dial tone. So
That's bad, Suzanne. Come
I
on.
know it's horrible. I've totally forgotten how to use a regular phone. I heard the dial tone and I dialed the number and nothing happened. And I was like, oh, forget this. I'll just grab my cell phone. So we have this idea. We're using this technology. We're moving forward in it. We've got all of these developments happening in this part of the world and that part of the world. And a lot of the time, they're not really kind of talking to each other because they're corporate interests and they want to facilitate the profits of the corporation. So a lot of this is happening in pockets in different corporations all over the world. So where all of that comes together to build something like in Terminator, where it's all harmonic and they actually have this and they're rolling it out, I would say that is so far into the future that nobody will even remember our names.
Well, you better hope so, because if these giant Terminators can create themselves to make more of themselves, and they can, withstand, nuclear bombs basically, and then eat humans, yeah, we want them to be way out in the future.
But
Stay away.
the robots can't eat humans
Well,
because
the new
we would
eater,
mess up their internal, stuff going on.
I guess it depends on the person you're eating, but according to DARPA, they've got these EATRs. I don't remember what that stands for, but they are able to consume organic matter, and that's like fuel to them or a recharge. So, but the media is really good at spinning things, and who knows what's really out there. Whatever DARPA is showing us is probably just a glimpse of what's really behind the scenes. And there's a lot of intel out there on incredible anomalies. But yeah, let's hope that the Terminator apocalypse is a long way away from us. Um, I really wanted to get into some other subjects tonight with you, but we've been talking for, geez, about 3.5 hours. And I'd love to have you back on the show again sometime. There's some good stuff that you're doing. I know that the marijuana and the cannabis for medical purposes is just incredible. There's been many people that have been able to not have nearly as many seizures or other problems because of cannabis. And but before we,
Yes.
what are you guys doing? Just give us a quick little glimpse, and would love to have you back on here again at the Leak Project. But before you go, Suzanne, just give us a little bit of info on what you're doing with that regards.
We have a company, it started as Crystal Pure CBD, and it has now grown to Halo Laboratories. We sell an isolate. So what we have done, because a lot of parents and cannabis and the movement to legalize and to medicalize cannabis is absolutely necessary. But THC doesn't necessarily have to be part of it. In fact, it doesn't have to be part of it at all because of the company that I started. Because my son had a seizure disorder brought on by vaccines. So we were able to naturally take the isolate cannabidiol out of the plant and synthesize it in a way that it looks like crystal. It looks like a packet of sugar. If you poured it out, it looks just like that. And we infuse it in hemp seed oil. We have a product that is the cheapest on the market that you could possibly buy. And I know people complain about the price, but think about how much you're paying for the medical marijuana with your medical marijuana card. Um, and you can purchase that on crystalpurecbd.com. It'll take you to a link to Legacy Bionaturals, which is the name of the company, and also Halo Laboratories, which is putting out Exalto. That it's a month's supply for $169. It for me, it is one of the most amazing things. And unfortunately, the FDA will not let me tell you about the amazing things because I'm not allowed to say it. But I don't worry about my son anymore. Uh, my son is fine. Our customers are very satisfied, and I am just, it's changed so many people's lives and given them more time to be here with their loved ones that if everything else went away and I stopped writing articles and I stopped doing my radio show and I stopped showing up on other people's shows, it wouldn't matter to me because I know that there are people out there who are here, and I'm very grateful to have been a part of making sure that that happens. And that's about all the FDA will let me say. So, um, it's very emotional to me because it's personal, and because we get the letters and the emails and the phone calls from our customers. And off air, I could tell you some things that are amazing. Um, but if you're interested in just the isolate without THC, it's legal in all 50 states, including most parts of the world. Canada, it's not legal, but we can ship out to you as long as it's legal in your country. And my husband's phone number is up at the top, his cell phone number and his business line. And I've seen him pick up the phone at like 3 o'clock in the morning to talk to people because we care about this because it's personal to us. And if you have any questions, you can email him. His name is David Posel. You can call him, set up an appointment. He has a new scheduling apparatus on the website, so you can actually schedule an appointment and he'll get that. And then whatever's convenient for you, he'll call you or you can call at that pre-described time. And crystalpurecbd.com. And I would absolutely love to come back on the show whenever and as many times as you want. I think you are amazing. It's so much fun to talk to you. I had a blast. I didn't even know we were talking for like 4 hours. Thank you so much.
A very special thank you to our guest tonight. For all of you that had the opportunity to be here with us, if you enjoyed the show, follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/clandestine timelord, for the most recent interviews, videos, and podcasts. Or you can check us out on the World Wide Web, www.leakproject.com. Would you like to be a guest on our show? If you have information that the world needs to see and hear, send us an email, guestbookings@leakproject.com. Thank you, everybody. This is Rex Bear with Leak Project. Stay safe and be the change you want to see. Good night. The board and free from the hive mind, this is Rex Bear hosting Leak Project. The Leak Project was created to offer awareness and information not found in the mainstream news. With over 90% of the world's media controlled by only 6 enormous conglomerates, many people today are looking for more accurate information. The Leak Project offers a refreshing approach to the brain-drained media. Check back daily for new content as we thrive to bring you the cutting edge in news, current events, on-scene video footage, interviews, and most importantly, the truth. So tonight's guest, ladies and gentlemen, we have Suzanne Posel. It's great to have you on the show again tonight, Suzanne. Thank you for making it out.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. I know that last time we talked, there was that glitch in Wall Street that caused that flash crash, and you were able to come out with some information about those algorithms that those giant corporations use to take advantage of the stock market. Recently, the past, I would say, month or so, there sure has been a whole lot of activity going on around the world. In China, they devalued the yen 3 days in a row, and on the third day, there's this giant explosion at this, they call it chemical plant. But when I looked at the photographs, I saw dozens of 42-foot containers that look like they got thrown around like a box of cereal. This enormous amount of square footage got blown to shreds, just got annihilated. You see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars that are just trashed. And in my opinion, that isn't a chemical explosion. That's got to be either some type of maybe tactical nuclear weapon, or I know that there is a lot of information out there about the Rod of God, this kinesthetic weapon from space, where this like satellite type system that throws these giant propulsion systems down into the earth at just mass speeds. But what's the information that you've put together about that explosion that happened in China, the first one that happened on August 11th in, I think the name of it is Tianjin?
Your guess is better than mine. I'm terrible at pronouncing foreign names correctly. To be honest with you, China has been working their people up into a frenzy for quite some time, and I'm sure that you've seen these articles about the internet being. They have the Great China Wall up in the internet, and they're blocking
Right.
websites, and they're not allowing people to talk, and they have this Chinese version of Facebook. It's not Facebook, but it's like a Facebook, and they completely shut that down and won't let people talk on it. And the press are not allowed to talk about certain things, otherwise they go to prison. There's a huge tension going on in China, especially and if you look at it the other way with the multinational corporations, they're paying the governments and the provinces and then the workers very, very little, and they're getting a lot out of it. And you can only work people in that indentured servitude for so long. And millennials are the same across the world, whether you're in India or in Pakistan or in China or in Russia. millennials are exactly the same, and they all have access to the internet and they all know how to use it. And really, what I think that's happening in China is the oppressive government um, has probably pushed too many people too far, and they're really getting sick of it. And they are acting out in defense of what they feel like is the only way to do things because the government and the society is so, like I said, so oppressive that the only way to do something is to do something big and do something grandiose. As far as some of the evidence that has come out, I don't see enough research into what it could have been and the hypothesis that come out of that. I don't see any expert evidence that what they're asserting is even possible. So I think I'm going to fall back to my interpretation of what's going on in China. They are, uh, it's like a dark ages. They're trying, and it's in the middle of a technological revolution. Everybody's got access to it. Imagine you're the only kid on the block who, in 1985 didn't have a Nintendo 64. You probably would have felt really bad about yourself. Well, that's kind of like how it is in China. They know that they can proverbially go over to somebody else's house and play the Nintendo 64, but they don't have access to it themselves as we and everybody else pretty much does. And yet they are the makers of all of this technology, which is ironic because you go and you buy your new iPhone, for $600, $700 or $1,000, and it cost the company $1.50 to make at one of these sweatshops. So these are the people who are making the products that we're buying, and we're able to use technology that they're not able to use, and yet they're making the products. I think there's just some plain human envy and wanting to be free and not wanting to be oppressed. That I think the millennial generation in China, which, like I said, is the same over throughout in any nation, it's a generation that really does not want to be oppressed, that wants to express itself as it sees fit, and doesn't want to live under the oppressions of the generation before in such a great extent because they have access to the internet. They grew up with social media, so they know what it's like to talk to people all over the world and have access to multiple ways of looking at the same issue just because of cultural differences and perspective. So to cut them off from that is extremely detrimental to any branch of this generation, especially in China, because it's such a large part of the generation there. They're just like in Japan, they're going to be experiencing a bottlenecking where they have more people over 65 than 25-year-olds entering the workforce. And so I think that this generation is willing to demonstrate and act out and possibly do damage to corporations or interests in government that they see are oppressive.
So, do you feel that it was somebody within China that actually caused that explosion?
I couldn't say because I don't know enough about it to even comment on that. And so to do that, I wouldn't want to sway the audience in some way because I don't have enough information to speak on that. But just looking at everything that's been happening up until this point, um, we have a tendency sometimes to think about things as isolated incidents. And we also have the tendency to when we are faced with a situation or an event, because of the way that we think about things, we think that that event somehow correlates to what we already think is happening, confirmation bias. And so, because of that, I don't think that anyone could really answer that question, unfortunately, unless the people who did it come forward. Because even in China, the journalists are being, sequestered in the way that they don't have freedom of speech at all, even freedom of the press. So if they say something and it's published and the government finds out about it, that journalist or that media company is going to prison. Someone's going to prison and nobody wants to. And to be honest with you, there's so much going on in the world. As a journalist, you don't want to really stick your neck out if you're in China to get arrested over this one thing because there's so much other things that you could be covering. And I don't necessarily agree with that way of thinking, but I see that in the behavior of what they're producing as far as journalism goes. So I get that. I understand you got family, you don't want to sit in prison, who wants to sit in jail, right? So I think that we don't have access to good quality information that we're left to speculation. And I don't think that the quality of the speculation is enough to entertain too much conversation. Even though it's good to talk about it, it's really all just conjecture.
Well, and it's just very peculiar that the third day in a row China devaluates their currency. There's this enormous explosion at a chemical plant, but if you look at what's around that chemical plant, there's hundreds, if not thousands, probably more like thousands of cars that were just completely destroyed, brand new cars, and now they're going to have a difficult time with the production of those vehicles. And then I think it was approximately 10 days after that, there is another explosion at another chemical plant in Zibo City, and that was on August 22nd. And then the day after that, there's a giant explosion at a U.S. military base in Japan on the 23rd.
And the way that it's all centered around commerce leads me to my deduction of what I'm seeing, because we've done that here in the United States, not blowing up chemical plants, but we boycott, we bring down corporations, we make corporations do things they don't want to do simply by voting with our dollars or exposing enough of their shenanigans that they stop doing what they're doing. But in an oppressive government, when you have no ability to do that, you have no laws that say you can do that, what else can you do? And if you sit there twiddling your thumbs and pretending and going to work every day like everything's fine and you know it's not, and you don't want to, maybe you're 20 or 30 years old, maybe you're starting to think about having a family, maybe you might want to have a family in the future, but you can't bring yourself to think about having children in this kind of society and growing up in this kind of world, which is different over there than it is over here. So under that perspective of oppression, I can understand that by attacking the economy, they think that they're possibly achieving some goal that would disrupt enough of the larger businesses and the government cut of those businesses to give them an opportunity to maybe possibly say something in public that they wouldn't normally be able to say.
Right. And remember when we spoke last, you talked about how there was this really good news article that you've actually got on your website, which is occupywallstreet.org. Is that correct?
No,
Occupy
corporatism.
I'm sorry. I had a flashback there from a few years ago when they had those giant, all the protesters going around Occupy Wall Street. You're occupycorporatism.org.
.com.
Perfect. So you had an article on there, and I'm sure you still do, for those that might want to take a look at it, that shows in pretty good detail about how there's approximately 85 people that control pretty much everything.
Yes.
Do you think that, I know this is speculation, and I really appreciate the fact that you don't want to come out on the record unless you have some very solid data points pointing to that evidence, but do you feel that maybe certain people within those 85 or maybe certain factions that don't want to see the Chinese currency continue to go down for whatever their financial reasons are, do you think that they might have had a hand in that? A little bit of an influence? Just
a hand in the explosions?
Yes, just speculatively speaking.
Well, the explosions would actually hurt them because you have to think about this from the corporate side. Okay, so the multinational corporations who these people would be invested in, let's just take the cars. Okay, let's say for argument's sake that it was a major manufacturer, a Japanese manufacturer, a Chinese manufacturer, whatever. And they sell those cars all over the world, especially in developed nations like the United States and the UK and Australia and Canada. Those big people would be invested in these multinational corporations, these car manufacturers, and they would not want to see product that could possibly be sold on the market go to waste because they're losing money. So it doesn't make any sense to me that they would be behind that. It's a lot easier. We've seen it with the United States. It's a lot easier to go in and set up a fake revolution and take down the government that way, except it doesn't always work in every country. So I don't think that it's necessarily this, New World Order, these big 85 guys who want to destroy everything. And ironically, they want to destroy the thing that makes them money. So I just don't get that logic. But I don't think that they would deliberately do something that would cut into their profit margin. And this cuts into their profit margin because they are invested not just in many of the multinational corporations, but they're invested monetarily with currency and with precious metals in China. So it would be cutting their nose to spite their face.
Sure. I've read a lot of information about how China does have many of these minerals and elements and precious metals, etc., that are very valuable around the world, which would make me think that maybe if we're able to get a foothold in China and establish some type of hegemony, it would be a lot easier for us to take over those assets and such as a American corporation or whatever. But one thing that I find very fascinating right now that's going on is, and we're going to jump into another subject here, hundreds of thousands of refugees right now are seeking asylum in many of the European countries as well as the US and abroad. And most of these people are young males in prime fighting age. There's not a whole lot of women. And I am under the impression that these hundreds of thousands of refugees actually might be enemy combatants. What's your take on that?
Well, actually, I just talked about that on my radio show a couple days ago because my audience had wanted me to comment on this, and I hadn't written any articles about it, so I decided to talk about it on my show. Actually, according to statistics from international groups as well as international journalists such as Vice and AJ Plus on YouTube, the majority of the refugees are children and women, and there are husbands and there are young men there, but the majority of them are children and women, which is the opposite of, in some outlets, what we're hearing. But when you look
That's
at
the
the
total
statistic,
opposite.
exactly. But when you look at the statistics from these international agencies, including Human Rights Watch, even go into the United Nations and look at their statistics, and the places that have taken people, like France and a couple of other countries, Australia. I think we're taking in 1,100, or is it 11,000? I can't remember how many zeros that is, and I apologize. So we've just decided to take in some of these refugees. It's atrocious what is happening to these people. It's disgusting. They're dying in order to get to an internment camp where they're treated like animals, where they're not given medical attention, they're not given adequate sleeping arrangements. And I'm talking about putting people in basically the same room, families and people that aren't related to each other, males and females and children, in just this giant room with cots everywhere. And there's not adequate bathing areas. There's not adequate toilets. They are denied medical care, like I said. There are days where they are not brought food. And I don't agree with everything that um, Angelina Jolie does and says, but she did call this right when she came out and said that the Syrian refugees are being treated like animals. And, why not just kill them off? People seem to forget that Israel extends some of their reach into Syria. Some of the area that they've confiscated for settlements, that reaches into Syria. So it doesn't surprise me. And the countries around Syria are not taking these refugees, except for a few of them that can't afford to take them anyway. So what we're seeing is the systematic destruction of a people. And these people are just trying to get away from their cities and towns that are crumbling. It's either be killed by ISIS or one of these Al-Qaeda, Taliban kind of terrorist organizations, or wait for the US drone program to blow up your house. And so all these people want to do is leave because their cities are crumbling. And when they get to where they're going, if they survive the trip, then they are treated like animals and put into internment camps where there's double barbed wire, and they're lucky if their handlers take care of them. And they can't leave
Are most
because
of them
they're
coming?
surrounded by agents with guns and soldiers.
Are most of them coming out of Syria?
Yes.
Now, there's been chaos in Syria now for several years, though. Many speculate that right now, because of this giant exodus, that there might be people behind the scenes that are actually orchestrating that, such as those that control ISIS. Now, there's a lot of speculation and information that ISIS might actually be controlled by certain factions within the U.S.
Well, here's the funny thing about it. ISIS is not anything new. ISIS has been around a long time. And what the CIA loves to do is when they see something that has potential, they go in there and they make sure that the potential that they see comes to fruition. So the CIA did not create ISIS, but what the CIA has done is gone in there and take a situation that they see they could work out to their favor. And when we were fighting Assad, and go in there and help train them, give them weapons, give them intelligence laptops, phones and satellite communique and all sorts of stuff. But ISIS is really a problem between the Sunni and the Shia. And that argument goes back to 590. So this is not that the government created this. This is that the government is taking an opportunity to make something happen that they want to happen. Unfortunately, like most people find out, if you look back in history, when you start something like a revolution or a war, you can't really control that. You can start it, but you're not going to be able to control how it goes and where it ends and who gets hurt along the way. So now what we have is a huge mess, and it is growing, and it is completely misconstrued. And the unfortunateness of the misconstruing of it lends to its confusion and the detriment of the people who are trying to flee, like we were just talking about the refugees. They are the collateral damage. So maybe we should stop talking about that and start talking about the actual problem that we have in those countries, which is those countries are run by their religion. They are theocracies, and their theocracies are extremely oppressive. Now, they have two factions of their theocracies, the Shia and the Sunni, and one is very conservative, like our evangelical conservative right-wing Republicans here in the United States, and the other side is very liberal, like the liberals, that everybody complains about in the right wing. So those two factions are having a battle that the Protestants and the Catholics had, in the 16th century. Except we're seeing that battle now because it's happening. And it's happening now with all of our technology. Imagine if the Protestants and the Catholics during the 30-year war had access to satellites and drones and all sorts of, ground-to-air missiles and all sorts of stuff. That fight would have been completely different. So take that fight and put it in 2015, and that's what we're seeing now. Now, the unfortunate part about that for governments like the United States is main exports of oil that we use are centered in those countries. And it is in the interest of the United States and the UK and other countries to make sure that the flow supply does not stop and that the people who are benefiting monetarily from the flow supply are not terrorists. So they have a problem. They've helped these people get to an advanced state that we see today. But like I said, once you let something go, you can't really control it. So you've got about 20 to 30,000 soldiers. That's all ISIS is, 20 to 30,000 soldiers. And yet somehow they are able to take down trained militaries of nations that we know and love. And I just want to bring this up as a side note. Isn't it ironic that the only country that has their own military fighting ISIS right now is Iran? I'm just going to put that out there.
That is ironic. And that brings me to the next question. It was maybe 2.5 years ago that I saw multiple pictures of Bashar Assad, the leader of Syria, and it showed pictures of him dead where it's either staged photographs or it's real, but he kind of disappeared in the limelight here in the U.S. as far as publicity after that. And then some people came out and said it was a hoax. Some people came out and said it was real. But what's your information on that? Is he still around?
I don't have any reason to doubt that he's alive.
Did you see those photos from a couple years ago?
No, I have not. But my husband works in graphic arts.
Okay.
And so, and I've seen him manipulate video and audio. And just to prove a point, he took a YouTube video and downloaded it and manipulated it and showed me how you can do this. And we were talking to, he has a web developer that he's working with for the for Halo Laboratories, the crystal pure CBD that we sell. And I caught a conversation where they were talking about graphics, and they both the web developer and my husband were talking about how at least 50% of what you see, photographs and video, take it with a grain of salt. It's fake. So the fact that you can go on me, as rudimentary of an understanding of technology as I have, I can go on a website like befunky.com and put in filters and manipulate a picture and spit it back out. And it's an online service that is like Photoshop. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles that Photoshop has, but it's just enough that I can create a meme, which I do on a regular basis. But if I can do that, as simpleton as I am with the programs that are available today, someone with half a brain, I have about a third of one, someone who has half a brain could do tremendous stuff. So I wouldn't take that with any seriousness without corroboration from credible places like obituaries are really good. They usually put things out in the paper or online. But then again, it's very easy because it has happened in the past. And for some reason, we kind of get caught up with this idea that because it happened once or twice, that it happens every time. Like we were just talking about crisis actors. So now people think that nothing happens and that everything is a false flag, which that's not even the definition of false flag. See, the term false flag has been redefined in the alternative media to suit an agenda. But a false flag is actually a government framing another government or faction to do something. And they cause this terrible event to happen, and they blame that government or that faction on it. So there are very few false flags that ever happen. We know Lusitania was a false flag, but it doesn't mean that somebody who down the street kills 3 people, or that gentleman who shot the reporter and the cameraman, that was a false flag. That doesn't even fit into the definition of false flag. So everything that happens on the internet, and the internet is the wild, wild west. Imagine if not only the newspapers, what we consider mainstream legitimate news, but also the Onion and the Inquisitor and the Mirror are all together in the same place, and no one can tell them apart. And so you have good information and you have really bad information, and you have it mixed up together. And because everyone has access to it, and because we have social media and we share so much of it, it all gets lumped up into, oh, it must be true, especially if it comes out of the mouth or the social media account of someone that we trust. So when I see people quoting the Daily Mail, when they're reporting the news, and I'd have to scratch my head, because like anybody in the UK listening knows that the Daily Mail is a tabloid journal. It's not credible news. It's like the Weekly World News. So anything that comes out of there has to be heavily researched before it's ever reported on, because it's not true. And I know some people say that, tabloids have won a Pulitzer Prize, but just because you jump through the hoop once doesn't mean that you jump through the hoop every time. So we have a lot of misconceptions about things, and really it's because there is an agenda to scare the living daylights out of people as much as possible, because people who are scared are loyal and they buy lots of stuff, especially if they're Americans. Americans think that if they have a problem, there's a product and they can buy it, and when they get that product home and they start using it, all their problems will go away. And we look at media the same way. And the fear-mongering has become deafening, in my opinion, because of the internet. Before you had to wait for the 6 o'clock news, you had to wait for Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw, or even before then. I'm a Gen Xer, I'm sorry. But you had to wait for these people at the 6 o'clock news to tell you what was going on. I don't have to wait for them anymore. And my children don't. And nobody does. So we have access to any kind of information we want. And if you want to do research and you want to find information on something, I promise you it's out there. I was just talking with a friend of mine about a very terrible story. They wanted me to cover it on my radio show, but it's really graphic and it's horrible. And I just couldn't do it, because even reading the story made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't take it. But that's out there. And just so that you know what I'm talking about, it's a woman who was just arrested. She's involved in a type of pornography that includes murdering small animals. And her lawyers are saying that because she makes videos and she makes money, that this is an infringement on her First Amendment rights to free speech, which is why my friend wanted me to cover it on my show. And knowing that people are out there like that think that this is a sexual turn on to them, to the extent that she would be able to make these videos and make a living off of it, that's a sect of people I don't even want to know exists. And I cringe, because you would never know who they are. You could be walking down the street. They wouldn't be out there with t-shirts saying, I watch this kind of disgustingness, that I pay for this kind of stuff. They wouldn't want their husbands or wives to know that they do this. So knowing that that is out there, and knowing that element is out there, really disturbs me. But taking it back to news consumption, that element is out there that simply has a vested interest in your fear of tomorrow. Whether or not it actually comes to pass, they've got a built-in fail-safe for that. Oh, well, I exposed everything, so we got it out there and we changed their plans. No, really? You're talking about people who make billion-dollar trades in a second, and they care about a news outlet that makes them maybe a couple $1 million a year in revenue, and that's not even before overhead. No. These people don't. Bill Gates doesn't care. Elon Musk doesn't care. Any of the Rothschilds do not care. They don't care about what David Icke says about them. They don't care about what Alex Jones says about them. They don't care. They live in a completely different world. If you want to take a look at, and I know that this was a topic that you want to talk about tonight, but look at Donald Trump. He lives in a completely different world than all of us do. He doesn't know the reality that we know. And yet we think that he could represent us.
I remember when
as
Donald
people.
Trump was bald.
You do? I must have been too young. I always remember the swirl.
No, it was 20 years ago. I'm 38 years old. I remember when he had absolutely no hair on the top of his head, and the hair that he has now is real, but they're plugs.
I know that we outed Michael Bolton for something similar to this, and I don't know why he's able to. And he was at an event and he had some woman